Good afternoon and welcome to the Longmeadow School Committee meeting held today, December 22nd, 2015. This meeting is broadcast live on Longmeadow Cable Television, live stream on longmeadowtv.org, and is being recorded. We'll begin today with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Longmeadow School Committee maintains educational policies that foster continuous improvement by challenging and supporting all children in a safe and caring learning environment, enabling them to reach their highest potential and to become productive citizens. Through effective communication and positive relationships, the Longmeadow School Committee will make informed decisions in the best interest of the students, the schools, and the Longmeadow community. Prior to the beginning of our meeting today, I wanted to let everyone know that Janet Robinson will not be participating. And that John Fitzgerald is currently, will be delayed. He has a medical emergency that he is tending to, but he does plan to be here.
Is he okay?
I'm not going to get into it. Today's special meeting will be held to conduct the follow-up interviews with Marty O'Shea, Superintendent of the Hampden-Wilbraham Regional School District, and Dr. Neil Guile, Principal of Wolf Swamp Road Elementary School. And today's meeting will be structured as follows. Mr. O'Shea will be interviewed first, starting at the conclusion of my statement, and Mr. Guile will be scheduled for 3:30 p.m. Following the interviews, we will entertain a motion to begin deliberation and discussion on the candidates. The discussion will be an open and candid conversation about the qualifications that each candidate has. We will evaluate the pros and cons of each candidate based on merit and evidence that we have each researched as a committee from our interviews and the candidates with the interviews and the site visits we have conducted. The questions they have answered as well will be included in this discussion. Following our discussion, we will entertain a motion to appoint a candidate as the next superintendent of schools. And then we will enter executive session for the purposes of contract negotiation, and that will be at the time where the public is no longer able to be here. There will not be any visitor comments today, although we have had a lot of correspondence, which the clerk, Ms. King, will read. Yesterday, I waived the deadlines for the correspondence received prior to 4:30 yesterday is included in her statement. We've received everything else from every person after 4:30. It will be recorded on January 4th. We have read it.
Yeah,
But just for the purposes of the record.
I was just going to make that clarification too. So you want me to read all?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So the following, we've received the following correspondence, and it is all in relation to the superintendent search. We have an email from Heather Sullivan dated 12/16, email from Elizabeth Terrain dated 12/16, an email from Molly Orr dated 12/17, a hand-delivered letter from Melanie Rothstein dated 12/17, an email from Larry and Deb Milo, dated 12/17. Justin and Jill Baker, dated 12/18. Tom Dignazio, dated 12/18. Lori Bernardi, dated 12/19. Jim and Denise Thomas, dated 12/18. Stephanie Jasmine, dated 12/19. Linda Desaro, dated 12/19. James DeBurn, dated 12/18. Kathy Rosado, dated 12/20. Stephanie Nevio, dated 12/20. Lee and Deirdre Borgo, dated 12/20. Joseph Thomas, dated 12/20. Amy Appel, dated 12/20. Ellen Dignazio, dated 12/20. Jess Hutchins, dated 12/20. Lynn Doyle and Harriet Parzivad,
Yeah.
dated 12/20. Shelley and David Len, dated 12/21. Amy Holt, dated 12/21. Judy Cherichetti, dated 12/21. An email and letter from Marty O'Shea, dated 12/21. An email from Lee Vingo, dated 12/21. Email from Elizabeth and Rick Norman, dated 12/21. An email from Noreen Earl, dated 12/21. An email from Lori and Jim Wheeler, dated 12/21, and an email from Georgia Robert, dated 12/21.
Thank you. At this time, we'll begin our follow-up interviews with Marty O'Shea, and we will hopefully conclude close to 3:30, just so we're getting Neil in here at a reasonable time. And so as soon as he's here, we can begin. Do you want to mark trade places? Yeah.
I was watching
Yeah.
at home.
Sounded like he had a viewing party.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So we want to welcome you back. Thank you very much. And I know that site visits were conducted today, and I know that the 3 people who participated in that will kind of walk through what happened when we have our discussion. But in the meantime, we've asked you and Dr. Guile back just so we could ask some more free-form questions and have more of a conversation.
Sure.
Last time, the questions that we asked we came up with them prior to knowing who the finalists were, and they were all the same for everybody. And so at the request of the committee, we're just conducting a few follow-ups. And so at this point, what I'll do is I will open it up to the committee to begin their inquisition.
Oh my goodness.
No, I'm just kidding.
Do you want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. I was wondering if you could describe how a regional school district works, from your point of view. If you can tell me where the funding comes from, how the school committee is organized, and a little bit on how that's different from Long Meadow.
Sure. Yeah, it's certainly a different dynamic. I think the quickest, most succinct way I could explain it is to say that we are our own political entity, in the same way that a municipality or a town or a city is a political entity. And so there's specific statutes and specific requirements that go along with being a region. So in that sense, we're wholly responsible for the revenue that we receive, and we're wholly responsible for the costs that we incur, right down to even the debt that we would need to incur in the event that we were borrowing for a school construction project. So when we went out in 2009, the year I became superintendent, we had to seek the local approval, and we ultimately incurred the debt to finance the construction of the new Minitrog. And so as superintendent, I was responsible for explaining to the communities, both communities, Hampden and Wilbraham, the impact of that borrowing and what it meant in terms of household obligations, and what it meant and how it linked up with the town borrowing schedule. So in terms of the school committee, it's a 7-member committee, and there are 5 members from Wilbraham and 2 from Hampden. And that split is based on the student population. So historically, it's been about a 75-25% split between Hampden and Wilbraham, with Wilbraham having 75% of the students and Hampden having 25%. And so that split is reflective in the composition of the school committee. It's also reflective in the assessments to the 2 towns. So the regional school committee has to put together a budget, I think it's by the 2nd week of March each year, and from that budget comes an assessment, essentially a bill that we give to the 2 towns for the cost of educating children in the regional school district. And I want to be careful about how I characterize that assessment, because I wouldn't want the suggestion to be that we just kind of come up with a budget in a vacuum, without any conversation or input or dialogue, and just simply, here it is. It's really, there is a lot of legwork and conversation that goes into the creation of a school budget in a regional school district. So it really is it's a very different, it's a different set of circumstances. And I think I mentioned in my last conversation with the school committee that that's why I would want you as a committee to know that, whatever solutions or directions that we've applied in Hampden Wilbraham don't necessarily translate here in Long Meadow. Different communities, different dynamic. The regional angle changes things also. And so as a regional district, it's critical that we work very closely with the select boards and the finance committees in both Hamden and Wilbraham. And so, our approach has always been to try to develop manageable assessments to the two towns. We don't want there to be any surprises. We want to, during that budget season, I'm off meeting with the Hamden and Wilbraham Boards of Selectmen. I'm off meeting with finance committees, trying to understand what their challenges are budget-wise, and also conveying to them what some of the factors are that we're dealing with. So I appreciate the question, because it's certainly it is a different dynamic in a region, and we're wholly responsible for our own HR, facilities management, technology, benefits. Everything is run out of the office, the district office.
Thanks.
Any follow-up, Liz?
Let's see. So yeah, I was looking on the town website, and I just wanted to clarify. So you're also, and you said benefits. So you're responsible for paying your own health insurance and retirement benefits.
Right.
So and on Long Meadow, the town's responsible for that.
Right.
So you're incurring a different kind of cost than we are.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I have two questions. I'm hoping that we can be, I'm not looking to be here for an hour, so I'm going to be kind of direct. I have done a little bit of research when I look at the differences between Hamden, Wilbraham, and Long Meadow. I look at your general fund budget, $39 million, ours $36 million. Your grants are about $1 million more than ours. Your total expenses about 44.9. Ours are 45. This is Alpha Desi's website, 2014.
Yep.
Your per pupil spending is 13.3. Ours is 14,000. Your class size is 18.9. Ours is 19. You have a special ed population of 14%. Ours is 17.1. Yours is a low income. Your low income is 15.7%, and ours is 6.8. I feel like that has to do with some of my questions. And the student-teacher ratio in Hamden Wilbraham, 14.5 to 1, and Long Meadows is 12.2 to 1. So some questions that have come up. The first one is, I feel like, an easier one to answer, because after talking with some people at your group, I kind of get this one, so I want everyone to hear the budget shortfalls that we've heard. The past few years, you've had $1 million, so budget shortfall. If you can explain that,
Sure.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, no, and it actually goes back to the first question. So as a regional school district, we are responsible for putting together a budget that hopefully is manageable to the towns. And so we have to put that budget together 45 days prior to the first town meeting. So there's a fairly lengthy period of time. We have to set the budget early. And so our budget conversations begin, as I suppose they do here, but we're January, February, and the budget is set middle of March. And at that time, you're setting the budget based on projections, revenue projections and cost projections. And so, from that point forward, you're working with legislators, you're working with town officials, you're working within your own budget to try to enhance revenue through advocacy with the towns and with the state. And you're also looking to figure out ways to contain costs. So I think that an important point to remember is that we have these projections, and we try to be very open with the community about where we stand budget-wise. So we might be telling the community in March and April, we're looking at a significant gap that's going to affect services. But fortunately, for the most part, those projections have not come to fruition in Hamden Wilbraham, in the sense that because revenue turned out better than anticipated, because we've been very creative in terms of containing costs or identifying efficiencies, or perhaps the towns have, worked with us to address the gap. And so, that's one of the challenges, I think, as a superintendent is, during that budget season, you are necessarily and prudently conservative. You don't want to underestimate your costs, and you don't want to underestimate your revenue. So you go into the budget season, with those conservative projections, with the hope that revenue will turn out better than anticipated, and your costs will come in lower than anticipated as well. And so that's been the case, and I'm happy to talk to you about some of the ways we've achieved those efficiencies, some of the ways we've contained costs. I think some of it came up in the first interview, but I'm really proud of what we've done in the last 5 years to make critical investments where needed and to maintain services. And so, a lot of the dire news that, sometimes we have to communicate turns out not to be the case, because we've been successful in the way we've managed the budget, the way we've allocated the budget, the way we've contained costs. And that continues, into the summer, June, July, August, September. You're continually looking for ways to identify efficiencies in ways that don't affect services. At the end of the day, you want to allocate a budget in such a way that supports teaching and learning at the classroom level.
And so the next question that I have, we have over 30% of our budget is allocated towards special education.
Yeah.
The test scores for our special education exceed the states in every grade level. And when I say exceed, like 16% is the state for fourth grade ELL, 37 is Longmeadow. Like, this is, to me, that's a very good, although I know that we're striving to be better.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Hamden Wilbraham and just looking at the fourth grade ELL score. 12% were proficient or advanced, and the state was 16. And I see that with a few of them when I go all the way up through 8th grade. I have to say, when I get to 10th grade, when I look in Longmeadow and I look at Hamden Wilbraham, I see very similar scores.
Right.
They, for some reason, 10th grade, I don't know what the change is, but
Yeah.
they seem to do well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can explain a little bit about the last few years in special education.
Sure.
What types of things you're trying to do to improve the scores, and to work with the parents and the teachers to make that happen.
Yeah. So I'm aware of Longmeadow's success, and quite frankly, I said in the first interview that that's one of the things that's intriguing about this position is that this is a community that holds education in high regard, and the results are evident. I think that, just to roll it back a little bit, in Hamden Wilbraham, we have made a significant commitment over the last 5 years to supporting struggling learners in the least restrictive ways and most inclusive ways as possible. And so our approach has been to, and really most successful at the elementary level, kind of understand where individual students are in terms of their learning, in terms of their needs, in terms of their gaps, the deficiencies, really understand where they are as learners, regularly monitor their progress throughout the course of the year, and then at the earliest possible moment, at the first sign that there's some struggle academically or behaviorally, we will provide some targeted interventions. And so the results have been really encouraging for us in the sense that we have reduced our special education, the percentage of students who are identified as needing IEPs from, in my time, from around 19% to just under 15%. I think it's 14.9%. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean that we're denying services. In fact, we have increased special education services. I gave the visiting team today in their binders, I provided in the back a listing of special education staffing as it existed in 2010 in Hampton-Wilbraham versus special education staffing as it exists currently. And so what you'll see is that despite challenging budgets and despite fewer students being on IEPs, and despite declining enrollment, we've actually increased special education staffing. You know, particularly counseling supports have been really critical for us. An idea, you know, something that's near and dear to me is the idea that, you know, we're here to educate the whole child, and we want to support their entire growth and development. And, you know, the irony is that, you know, we've reduced the number of students under services, but had those struggling learners been part of the special ed testing population, ironically, our special ed results probably wouldn't be better in terms of MCAS. But I would say very confidently that we have bolstered supports for students who need services in Hampton-Wilbraham. We have managed to reduce significantly the number of students that we place out of district, and we've seen a significant reduction in out-of-district tuition costs. So and again, in my time as superintendent, from about $4.1 million down to $3.1 million. So what does that mean? This isn't about budgets. It's about giving kids an opportunity to be educated in their home district. And so I think that's been a huge success for us. And I would really encourage you, if you can, to take a look at that staffing picture, because I think it'll give you a sense of how we've allocated our special education testing, or excuse me, our special education staffing resources. So we've been very targeted, very inclusive. We've been very successful in providing intensive supports that students need. In terms of the work that has been important to me, you know, I've tried to look for those high leverage points that will help us support students who need supports. And, you know, quick story, I was telling one of the members of the visiting team today is that when we were designing and constructing the new Minichog, we were initially told that there was some space for intensive programming, intensive special education programming run by the collaborative that would not be reimbursed. And that was not acceptable to me, you know, on a personal and professional level, because the students, I had, you know, really strong ties to that program and to the students in that program, and I know what that program meant to Minichog. I know what it meant to the kids in that program. It's a really important, special part of the tradition and culture of Minichog. And so I was on the phone calls with the executive director of the MSBA saying, we need to address this. This program is critical to supporting these students coming from the collaborative, and many of whom were Hampton-Wilbraham kids as well. And we were successful. And ultimately, the MSBA wound up reimbursing us for that space. And that's something that I feel really good about, because that I felt strongly that we wanted to get that program included as part of the whole package. So we've seen strong results, and you know, to talk about test scores. So I would agree with you that there's definitely some targets for us, right? And there always will be. There's always going to be targets that you want to identify based on the testing data that you have. But I'm really encouraged about what's happening also in regular education, in the sense that, you know, so at Green Meadows Elementary School in Hamden, we recently learned that Green Meadows was designated as a level 1 school on the DESE accountability framework. That's a huge success. It's very, very difficult to achieve level 1 status as an elementary school. And that means you only get that status, you only get that designation if you're being successful in meeting achievement gaps, if you're being successful in meeting the needs of your neediest students. So we're getting, you know, I'm proud of the work that we've done in that area. I'm proud of the investments that we've made in special education. And again, if that is something that is, you know, critically, strategically important to Longmeadow, that's something I want to learn more about, you know. That's something that I'm really interested in talking to this committee about, to talking to teachers about, to talking to the community about, to say, okay, you know, you've been very successful, and let me learn about that, and what can we do, and how can we strengthen that?
Do you want to follow?
Let me think, let me read this. When looking at, well, I mean,
Well,
I'm sorry, oh, sorry.
I think Russ has a specific.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'll let you edit me on that one.
Go ahead, yeah.
And then-
In looking at, I mean, back to the special education scores, in looking at the data over time, it looks like they've kind of been on a downward trend for the last, I don't know how many years. Have you identified that as a trend, and have you taken any steps to address that trend?
I think that has been the reason that we have adopted MTSS. So MTSS is, we won't get too deep into it, but MTSS is a way to provide tiered systems of support to kids. And so that was the specific reason we said, we want to make sure that we've got the best instruction, the best universal instruction at the classroom level, and we want to make sure that if students are struggling, that we're going to identify ways to support them. And so that has been the driving force behind MTSS. And again, we've reduced there are a lot of different indicators that you can look at. Mm-hmm. One of the indicators that I would encourage you to think about is, what percentage of your students are identified as needing special education services. We were too high, frankly, 5 years ago. When we were close to 20% of our population, that's not good for kids. That's not providing a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. We're being too restrictive. So we said, let's be more inclusive. Let's make sure we're meeting kids' needs in a regular education setting. And so that was the driving force behind MTSS, and we've seen success in that. And again, it's about meeting children's needs. It's not about denying services. It's about making sure you're giving them what they need on a regular basis. And so we've been very, very inclusive and very, very targeted with the special education supports that we've provided.
Well, I'll let you.
I know that I'm a score, I harp on the scores a lot, but I can tell you that the reason most of us moved, well, I know the reason I moved here was because of what I saw on the DESI website. And so, besides the beautiful sidewalks. So I have to look at the scores when I look at, and I know that you can't, we're not comparing apples and apples when we look at the two districts. We're looking at a regional school district and a small town. We're looking at student-wise, 33,000, 3,300, 2,800. You have a higher population of low income than we do. But I do see a decline in MCAS scores overall.
Yeah.
The ones that stand out to me happen to do with math. The math scores just seem to need some help, and then like in our school as well, science. And so I guess I'd like to hear what steps you've taken or what you have been thinking about doing to improve those scores that you see at your school district.
Yeah. So when you're talking about the decline that you're looking at, are you saying?
I'm looking in general.
In general, in Hamden-Wilbraham or in Longmeadow?
In Hamden-Wilbraham.
Yeah.
Just because I've been looking at them, the MCAS scores for the general population. And so I just, math seems to stand out. 8th grade math, 7th grade math, 6th grade math seems to stand out. And so I just would like some.
Elementary math, we made some significant gains in recent years. And I think that you asked, how do you get there? How do you raise those scores? And there are tried and true practices. And so as superintendent, what do I look for? I want to make sure that we've got an aligned, articulated scope and sequence, that we've all got a clear understanding of what kids should know and be able to do at every grade level. And so that's a big part of the battle, is that you've got there's clear understandings among teachers about what should kids be able to do. And then beyond that, making sure that you have high-quality instruction going on in the classrooms, that teachers are equipped and able, have the resources to differentiate instruction. And then as superintendent, one of my jobs is to ensure that the resources are there for teachers to get the job done, so that there's appropriate class size, there's appropriate supports in the classroom, they have appropriate instructional equipment, there's appropriate professional development, all of which is kind of matched up and lined up with your instructional goals. So I think, I think we've seen actually growth at the elementary level. Again, go back to Green Meadows becoming a level 1 school. I'm anticipating that another one of our elementary schools could become a level 1 school next year. And so that's been really encouraging. Middle school is, something that, this has been part of our conversation, is that we are in the middle of a kind of a strategic focus on our middle schools, because we know that we can do more for our middle level students. We're eager to do that. We have, as we've talked about, this sort of unification conversation underway where, we're challenged because our resources are stretched out over 2 buildings, one of which could have an enrollment of under 200 students in the next few years. So, I really believe that if we're in a unified setting, we're going to be much more targeted, we're going to be much more able to provide kids with the type of instruction, the type of learning environments that they need to be successful. And change takes time. I think we're starting, we included in the site visit packet a description of the rollout of our elementary math series, and that took place over a series of years, and we're starting to see the results. We're getting some traction there. We're less far along with middle school math, and so that series was only adopted, I guess it was last year or the year before, and so I think we're going to start to see the results there as well. So when you're aligned, when you're coordinated, when you've got appropriate supports in place, you've got interventions for kids, you've got appropriate coaching for classroom teachers, you've got specialists that are working with teachers and administrators, you can get the results. And so again, I really appreciate the success that Long Meadow has had, and definitely recognize that it's a high-performing district, and that's one of the reasons that I'm here in front of you today.
That was going to be one of my questions, is
Yeah.
why the switch?
Why the switch?
Yeah, like why apply
Yeah.
for Long Meadow? And I know we kind of touched about it last
Yeah.
time, but just, you're getting ready to deal with middle schools.
Yeah.
It's no secret that we're going to have to deal with middle schools at one point in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, there's a lot
Why
of
move?
strategic challenges. There's strategic challenges facing, school districts everywhere, and relating to demographics and instructional expectations and relating to budgets. And so, that's part of what attracts me to the job in general. But you asked, why? So I worked in Long Meadow for 10 years, now in my 11th year in Hamden-Wilbraham. I started as a classroom teacher, as you know, public school classroom teacher in Long Meadow. And I think the idea of coming back to a district that I know as a classroom teacher, that I knew as an administrator, and applying what I've learned as the superintendent in a regional school district is really compelling. And I've got a lot of respect and admiration for this district. I love my job currently, though. I mean, I have a very supportive school committee, great leadership team. Hamden-Wilbraham are 2 communities that value education in the way that the Long Meadow community does. And so it's not so much that there's any push factor there. It's really, the attraction of working in Long Meadow.
I would like
Michelle?
to thank you for asking all the tough questions and getting out of the way. One question that I had left was, is there anything that you answered that you'd like to add to from our last interview? Did you go home and wish you had answered something differently or better?
No, I think I'd take head on, there's a couple issues that I would like to address, if that's okay. One relates to a residency requirement that was part of my original contract in Hamden-Wilbraham. And so, briefly, my first contract in Hamden-Wilbraham included a clause for me to move into one of those 2 towns within the first 3 years of my employment. And so in preparation for that, I kind of set a lot in motion, and the plan was I was going to move in the summer of 2012. Not at my request, the school committee approached me and indicated that they were going to pull that from my second contract, and they did. And so that requirement was dropped, and I think it was that, frankly, I demonstrated my commitment to Hampton Wilbraham, and so I kind of wanted to kind of lay that out there for you as a committee to make sure you're kind of comfortable and knowledgeable of that, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions about that. And my own growth and development is really important to me. I'm very far along in my doctoral program. I've got all my coursework done, 48 credits. 3/5 of my dissertation is in the books, and so I'm excited to bring that to a conclusion in the next several months. So those are two things I know that have been a concern and a question, and I thought it would be best just to kind of hit it head on for you. Yeah.
Okay.
Any follow-up?
Nope.
Okay. Russ?
My understanding is that you have a family member that's currently working on our staff.
Correct.
So how would you address things like contract negotiations and?
Yeah. So I have consulted with the legal team from the Mass Association of School Superintendents.
Okay.
And have been advised that it would be a matter of filing a disclosure, and then the extent to which I would have to recuse myself is probably a situational thing.
Okay.
My understanding is that I would not have to recuse myself from negotiations because it's such a broad area, and it wouldn't be so specific to my immediate family.
Okay.
But that's something that obviously I would want to talk to Long Meadow's legal counsel about to make sure that that's not problematic. My clear understanding is that there is no prohibition against being hired into a district where there's a family member currently working. There would be a prohibition against me hiring a direct family member, but not the other way around. And so that's something that I would want to, as I am in all matters, I would want to be very upfront and clear with you as a committee. I'd want to know what your expectations were of me, even beyond, what the law might require. I would want to obviously be in communication with you on that. But it would be important to kind of pay attention to that and file the disclosures that are necessary.
Okay, good.
Any follow-up? Or any additional questions?
Why don't I give you a hypothetical? So
Okay.
let's say we're interested in free full-day kindergarten.
Yeah.
What would the steps you would take to make that happen in a town such as ours? So as far as communication with the town, what the committee might do, what would be the process that you would envision trying to make something like that happen?
So that would be a big process. That would be, hypothetically, a major undertaking. It would require an investment, and so one of my approaches has been in Hampden Wilbraham is if I'm approaching select boards in Hampden or Wilbraham or finance committees in Hampden Wilbraham, and I say, look, we've got some needs. Is there any additional effort that you could make because we're facing these fiscal challenges? I always want to make sure that we've got our own sort of fiscal house in order. Before we approach the towns and say there's something new and additional that we want to do. So, the first thing is, frankly, is to make sure that you've worked inside your own budget to make sure you've got costs properly contained, you've identified all the efficiencies, you've been creative in allocations, and so I think you need that to do that, to establish the trust, to establish the beginnings of a good conversation with all the stakeholders that are out there. So I think that's important. I think it's, the next level of that is communication with the community, and understanding what are the expectations of the community. How valued is this? Is this is this a strategic priority? I mean, you can only have so many strategic priorities, so is this it? And that's an answer. I don't have an answer to that right now. I think that's something that I or anybody that you hire would have to come in and have those conversations and understand what the stakeholders value. But assuming that that's the case, if that's what the school committee was committed to, you need to have the conversations with the community. You have to be really aggressive about getting out into the community, going to where the conversations are. Not just, frankly, not just a school committee meeting, not just in an administrator's meeting, but getting out there and pushing the information out, meeting with individuals in small groups, larger forums, meeting with the select board, finance committee, making sure they understand what the implications are for the school budget. And so that would be important. But I guess before all that, I would want to understand, what's the educational goal? How does this fit into the strategic educational plan that we would have as a community? And how does this support learning? How is it going to help kids? How is it aligned with what's happening in first grade, second grade? How is it aligned with what's happening here at Long Meadow High School? So that you have to have a lot of things in order and in place before you even go to the community. I would want to have that confidence personally that we have a budget that's properly allocated, that we're ready to talk to the community about this. And I want to understand the challenges of the community as well. What is the community facing? In Hamden Wilbraham, again, there's conversations relating to facilities and fire stations or police stations and senior centers, and so you have to have an understanding and appreciation for that at a really high level as a superintendent, and that's something that I would really want that. Again, as you go into that conversation.
Did you have to, I was going back online and reading some of the meeting minutes from the last half of last year. And in March last year, there was a mention of the state cutting funding of full-day kindergarten. Did you have to move forward with figuring out how to fund that within your district?
We had,
without-
so there was, actually, I'll tell you, I'm not even quite sure how it all shook out, and here's the reason. We have full-day kindergarten in Hamden Wilbraham. And again, by saying that, I don't want to suggest that, that makes sense right now here in Long Meadow. That's not how I approach things. Different dynamic, different conversation in every community. But we have full-day kindergarten in Hamden Wilbraham, and it had been supported by the state's full-day kindergarten grant. We were getting about $90,000. We were scheduled to get about $90,000. In our view, the requirements of that grant were becoming too onerous. And in terms of the assessments that our teachers were required to conduct in class, in terms of the accreditation that the kindergarten schools needed, we had to go through the NEASC accreditation process. There was the MKIA assessment. There was a lot of reporting out that needed to be done, and we felt like the scales had tipped where the value of that grant really didn't match the requirements. The requirements were outstripping the $90,000 or whatever it was that we were getting for that full-day kindergarten grant. So we actually gave up that grant. We didn't reapply for it. And so frankly, I'm not sure if that ultimately got refunded. But so we fund full-day kindergarten with our budget right now.
Budget.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody else? I was gonna ask if you were hired, where you would stand on the East Long Meadow football games if you were there, and also
Right,
like playing
yeah,
that child.
right.
But in the last couple of years, we've taken on a couple different new curriculums, math, English, things like that. When it comes to engaging the staff and bringing them along, what do you feel is the best sort of process in soliciting teacher feedback and
Yeah.
staff feedback? I know that it's not just about curriculum, it's about the number of initiatives coming from DESE, coming from the federal government. How do you implement a new initiative? How do you decide, which ones you're going to really pursue? And, how do you bring staff on board?
I think, when you're, one of the biggest challenges I think any administrator faces, whether you're assistant principal, principal, superintendent, is sort of, when do you hit the accelerator and when do you hit the brakes? When are you kind of applying some forward momentum, and when are you hitting the brakes because of the realities of what's happening at the classroom level? One of the things I like to say is that we want to move forward with initiatives as fast as our time allows, as fast as our resources allow, as fast as professional development allows. You really can't move any faster than those things. You can pretend to. You can pretend to implement something, but if those things aren't there, it's not going to happen in meaningful ways. And so, I would rather commit to getting the engagement, having the conversations with the staff, making sure that they're ready for whatever, new curriculum or new initiative it is. And making sure that they feel like they're supported, they've got the professional development, they've got the resources to move forward. And, those conversations are really important, and that's where, your assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction or for learning, that's where that becomes a vital conversation. Is like, all right, so what is our goal? What does the timeline look like for the implementation of this new curriculum? In our case, with going back to MTSS, this, providing tiered systems of support, study year, pilot year, implementation year, fully blown out, so I prefer to kind of move that way, Now, then there are other times when, depending on the issue, if it's a safety issue or if it's a something civil rights issue, you got to move hard and fast. There is no discussion, when you're talking about, let's say it's the bullying requirements. It is what it is, and we have to get the staff up to speed with this. We've got to make sure that we're implementing this new requirement, and so. It's like, when can you hit the brakes? When do you hit the gas pedal? When do you have to move fast? And when do you have to be methodical? And that's something that I feel it's a strength of mine. I know when to move decisively and act quickly, and yet I also have enough experience to know when it makes sense to slow down and make sure people feel engaged and supported. Yeah.
So I don't have any follow-up. Does anybody else have any additional questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time and for accommodating everybody today who came to visit.
Thank you.
We certainly appreciate that.
Great, but no one ate the sandwiches, but we'll bring them next time.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. It was a great
Yeah.
chance, I think, for the team that visited to sort of get to know me in a different way, and to meet the team. And I'm really proud of the great work that we're doing
Yeah.
at Hampton Wilbraham. And I was proud to put members of my leadership team in front of the visiting team, some teachers, and who were parents, and the school committee, and some town officials as well. So it was a great opportunity for me. So I appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedule to come over.
Absolutely.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate it. And do you have anything that you want to add that you haven't added already, or anything?
No,
you
I
wanna say?
think again, I'm very eager and interested and hopeful. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so at this time, we have about 10 minutes until Mr. Giles scheduled and or Dr. Giles scheduled. And so why don't we take a quick break?
Let me check.
Oh, if he's here, okay. Either way, we'll take a quick 5-minute break. Water, restrooms, phone calls. So, and hopefully we'll be in touch. Welcome back.
Yes, long time no see.
It's been a while.
Looking forward to this.
Well, we appreciate your time, and we appreciate you opening up Wolf Swamp to our site visitors and showing them, all the great things that are happening over there. The purpose of this is to just do some follow-up questions. As you're aware, last time the questions we prepared in advance of knowing who the finalists were. And so we wanted to be able to ask a couple sort of free-form questions and have more of a conversation with you, more specific to your role and more specific to, your sort of work experience and history. Hopefully we'll wrap it up for you so you can get home to your kids at a reasonable hour. And so without anything else, I will open it up to questions. And do you have anything to say?
May I just open
Yes,
it
you may,
briefly?
absolutely.
I'm so sorry. I just, a couple prepared
Yeah, no, absolutely.
statements, and starting with thanking the committee again for welcoming me back. I do appreciate it. I have the utmost of respect for what you folks are doing, and in particular, taking the time to collect more information. So it shows your due diligence, and so thank you in that regards. And I appreciate the opportunity to answer any follow-up questions from the other night. And again, my interest in the superintendency is still strong, and I'm excited about it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Down there, please.
Sorry. You got it. Russ.
Okay, so I think we have two really different candidates here. So I think the biggest question in regard to you as a candidate is really, you haven't worked in central office. You've focused on elementary over the years.
Mhm.
And so really I think we need to hear is, one, how much experience do you have with central office in particular? Have you had, I know on the site visit they talked about these administrative meetings you have pretty frequently with central office. How involved have you been with the budgeting process, collective bargaining process, kind of the more district-wide issues? So I guess the first part of the question is that, just how involved have you been so far? What experience do you have in that regard? Second, if you don't have it currently, how are you going to get it? What are you going to do to make sure that you can learn about the other levels of the organization, learn about the central office? So those are really the two main questions I've heard from the community in general, and myself as well.
Yeah, fair, very fair. I think, let me start, I guess I would hit 2 points in particular. The first is recognizing that, the work I do as a principal there's certain leadership traits that are synonymous with the principalship and the superintendency. In particular, in just thinking about this, conflict resolution, consensus building, decision making. Those are day-to-day traits that I utilize or I am constantly using to navigate the I'm going to say complexities of being a principal. That being said, I look at those traits also being traits you're going to use at the superintendency as well. So there's that component where I just think the traits in what are consistent, and so I am prepared in that regard. Part two to that is being a quick study. I think I have to recognize, especially going through my doctoral studies, I'll use that as an example, and my learning curve is pretty short in that I'm going to do what I need to do to immerse myself in those experiences. I think of your comment about collective bargaining as a great example. Philosophically, I understand what collective bargaining stands for in the process of coming together and problem solving, recognizing where two parties are. So the framework I feel like I understand, but there's certain things that I would need to learn. We have an amazing admin team. And I, not that I would debate this, because I recognize it's a little hard to debate, but we work together so collaboratively to begin with that there are times when, to see a delineated line between superintendency and the principalship, that's not always the case because we are so ingrained. And then the other part just about the learning curve is, I think one of my strengths is I'm able to recognize when I don't know, and then I search out those experts. And again, I'm gonna say those experts are right here in central office, and they're the individuals that I would reach out to really gain a better understanding and to learn those areas that I'm not. I haven't yet to have exposure to. I think the last thing I would hit on that is the whole idea of decision making. In my current role, and by the way, I'm bringing this up because I feel it would not change in the superintendency, and in particular is, I still approach it, or I envision it happening the same way. I'm going to look at both sides, consider what is in the best interest of the students. Obviously, it's steeped in the data or objective facts, and I'm ultimately the one who's going to make that decision for the best interest of the students. So, yeah, I think I hit it all.
Yep. Thank you.
Anybody have any follow-up to Leslie's question? Okay. Michelle?
Okay, my question was, when you went home after the interviews, was there anything that you wish you had answered differently or better, or you'd like to add to now?
Just so happened. The whole night? No. In all seriousness, I think the one thing that I just I'll say I chuckled about was I don't think I did a very good job sharing with folks my leadership style, and it really. So I would take an opportunity now to just
Sure.
elaborate on that. In my mind, it comes down to three tenets. It's about relationships, instructional leadership, and shared leadership. When we talk about highly effective schools and districts, it all begins with the relationships that we have with one another, and the bonds, being able to recognize a common goal. So for me, it's all about the relationships, and then navigating those challenging decisions objectively and together. Sometimes I recognize it will not always be together, but we're going to still agree to disagree, be respectful of one another, because we have those relationships. The instructional leadership, and this actually, I wish Mr. Fitzgerald was here, because the part two of that instructional leadership, he had asked a question about mentoring the principals, and when I got home, I really trying to figure out what he was trying to get at. I think I pride myself on my understanding of instructional leadership, and that very idea of working with principals, working with teachers to look at best practice. And what do I mean specifically about that? When we already do this as a unit, we go into a school as a unit and we look at best practice. And so that whole idea of working with principals to calibrate what is best practice, what are those most effective strategies that we know research tells us about, and what are we seeing in our schools to, again, work together. And then the last piece is shared leadership, is that whole idea of, at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to make those decisions, but I'm also going to be respectful enough of all stakeholders to take the time and work with those key stakeholders. That is the job, in my opinion. So that was really one of those aha. I wish I could do that one again. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Michelle?
I just had my other question. I'm sorry I didn't. Does somebody else want to have one and I can come back to me? Or I know I had one more. Oh, I remembered. Sorry. In your resume, which I have to get it out, you mentioned a 17% growth. Thank you. There was something in there that I just wanted you to explain a little better. There are some people here that understand data much more than I do, but I wanted you to explain. Experienced growth in reading proficiency at Wolf Swamp has increased 17% by grade 3. Would you explain that for us?
Say it again, the 17?
Experienced growth in reading proficiency at Wolf Swamp has increased 17% by grade 3.
Yeah, so the proficiency had increased by 17%, and that was 13 to 14, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah. The one thing I would elaborate on, just for a moment, I should have had it reflected in there, and what I wanted to talk about also tonight was, in particular, open response. I would say when you look at our efforts relative to the MCAS, much of what we have done is targeted the open response in both math and ELA. And just to throw another statistic out there, and since 2013, the number of students scoring above a 2, which the rubric is a 0 to 4 rubric, so number of students scoring above a 2 has increased from 38% to 77% in ELA. And then in mathematics, 65 to 85. So I must have been alluding to that,
Okay.
Michelle, or Ms. Grotsky.
Sorry, no, that's okay. Your staff had mentioned the open response
Yep.
scores
Yes.
rising, and that it was a targeted area that you, so I wanted to, I didn't know if it was from there. Thank you.
It was, and just the last thing, I think when we look at the MCAS data, we try to do it as critically and analytically as possible. We do that as a team. We recognize certain trends. The open response is definitely one of those trends over the years where we have shown that we weren't meeting the mark. So we put a concerted effort into addressing that, and it's been incredibly exciting to watch that evolve. Our philosophy is specific to open response. If we have, students who can process, right, and then put it on paper, that shows they are able to think critically. And so that is very much one of our goals in terms of where we want students to be at the end of their elementary experiences. Can they think critically? Can they then put that to paper? So that gives you a little bit of my logic there.
Thank you.
So the scores go up. How did that happen? I mean, what happened in your building that
Great.
made
Yeah.
that occur?
Yeah, so what happened essentially was, first of all, I have an amazing staff. So you have to recognize, and I would say that district-wide, people want to institute change. So there was an urgency there. And through that urgency, and we're always talking about that, we have to be able to really frame the claim. What is it we're really looking to target? And once we create that urgency, there's a motivation that comes from that. So then we met regularly. First of all, we wanted to recognize what are the exemplars, what is good open response, look like, and then share that with kids so that everybody is on the same page. So we have those exemplars, and then the teachers, through the support of the literacy coach and literacy specialist, and one another, 3 through 5, we brought them together. I took the kids to an assembly, a 3 through 5 assembly, and worked with them on some social, emotional, or character building stuff while I was able to free up staff for an extended period of time. And they engaged in dialogue about, okay, this is what it looks like. We had samples of this is where they are. Mm-hmm. So we're able to then score. Teachers are calibrating their scores to make sure we're all looking at the same things. And then it's about providing explicit feedback, instruction to those kids who continue to struggle with what does a good piece look like. the second part to mention about that is, too, our response to intervention program. It's set up in a way to support the open response as well. So by looking at those low open response scores, we're targeting specific students. Those students are then supported in a supplemental intervention. In addition to what they're doing in the classroom, they're doing 30 minutes beyond that. Last year it was 40 minutes too, so I think that was our win block.
Is that transferable to the entire district?
I think, without a doubt. I think you'd see it happens. It is happening in the other buildings at all levels.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those. I think it's one of those best practices that we'd want to nail down and really talk about. But because I think we do it all to a varying degree, it'd just be really looking at, and that's one of the exciting things for me is, I already know what's going on at the elementary level. So I think it'd be great to extend that dialogue to the middle and high schools and just really talk about what is good practice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. You guys have kind of covered some of the questions that I had. So you've, I guess just kind of one question that I would have is, you've been in our district since 2011. You've got friendships, I assume, bonds with peers at the other schools. How difficult do you think it would be to go from being a peer to overseeing the entire district? How do you make that transition? I know we've got a couple principals that have been teachers and become principals. So to be an elementary school principal, it looked like your concentration was K through 6. How do you now become the superintendent of the entire district, K through 12, or preschool through 12?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think, like with anything, so much of it is about the relationship, and we would have to understand and have that conversation that my role is changing. It doesn't change how I am personally connected per se to that individual, but there's also got to be an understanding of here's my role now, and being respectful of that position. The one thing, again, I go back to is I so dearly appreciate the professionalism of my colleagues, and when I say colleagues, that's everybody in district. Is that from day one has been one of the most impressive things in my mind about the district. Is people come here to work, they understand their roles, and I'm sure there'd be moments where we would have to revisit that. But again, I think I have the relationships with people where we could have that honest conversation about where we stand. And two, I mean, throwing it out there is now I am supervising. That requires a level of accountability on my shoulders. And we have an evaluation tool that we would be using to hold everyone accountable. So there's a nice framework in place, I think, to work within.
Okay. Thank you.
Any follow-up to that?
Good question.
Liz?
I guess I would say for that kind of question, also, and you touched upon it before too, but because you're going to be supervising other people, maybe would you be open to be mentored as well as a superintendent?
Without a doubt. Yeah, it's a
Because
great.
you know how to deal with situations you haven't had before, and you're probably going to have to be a little tougher and tough-skinned.
The tough skin is very necessary.
Yeah, I agree, and I welcome that. I completely recognize that I actually, frankly, would hope there is that opportunity, and I know there are those opportunities. So,
Okay.
Anybody have additional questions before I ask a few? Go ahead. Okay. So, how you doing? As you are very, very aware, we've had 2 new principals in the last 2 years.
Mhm.
Actually 3, really. And potentially we'll have a new principal at Wolf Swamp, if you are selected for this position. Many of those people have had some mentoring, from previous administrators. How do you plan to, mentor new staff or new principals that that you now are, responsible for and responsible for the performance in those schools?
It's an area that I'm passionate about. I mentioned at our last time together that I've just completed a year-long, not quite completed, still need to submit some paperwork, but some final products. But the point being is I've gone through an experience over the last 11 months that specifically addresses how we work with new principals. We have standards. We have principal standards that we all subscribe to. So I would love to engage not even new principals, but all the principals in an opportunity to explore those standards and really, I called it a professional growth or a professional learning community. I forget what I kind of tried to come up with a clever title for it, but the point being is I wanted to engage the principals in a course that would really explore best principal practices. That's by doing walkthroughs. It's also exploring the standards, connecting it with data, and what that does too is that actually ties right into the evaluation tool and goals. So that would be my approach if I answer that.
Sure. Well, and on the same sort of point, let's say you have a principal who doesn't really want to engage in that course and isn't really being responsive to the type of coaching that you'd be providing. How do you handle a difficult conversation like that? And really, by extension, how do you handle a staff member who isn't being responsive to or isn't responding to the type of coaching that your principals are trying to apply to them?
Mm-hmm. I kind of look at it. Well, I was going to say almost two different.
They are different, but,
scenarios
by the
here.
same,
So maybe to just speak about the latter
Sure.
first. I think again we recognize the team of administrators that we have in Longmeadow, and in my mind, it's really supporting them. So if they're coming to me with this problem, then it's about problem solving with that administrator and recognizing what have we done. What steps have we put in place to work on that situation, and then how can I be of support, whether I need to step in or intervene, or maybe there's certain ideas I have for that principal to go back to the table with, if that makes sense.
Sure.
The first was more about if there's an issue with the principal,
Sure.
with the principal itself.
Not that we have any.
No, I'd be very clear in,
Right to you.
in agreeing with you on that.
But there may be a new member of the admin team, so we can use that person
Yeah,
X
yep.
as an example.
Fair enough. But again, there's a couple layers there. I mean, I think it goes back to your question a couple moments ago about mentoring. I'm committing to bringing on board somebody that we have gone through a rigorous process, identifying as a high quality principal. So I have a responsibility. There's a certain level of commitment I have to that individual. Knowing my colleagues, principal colleagues already, I still say I have a commitment to them because I know the work they do. So it's really about supporting them. but we know in every situation that doesn't always work out. Just like the work I do with teachers, I would be deploying the same strategies for my work with a principal. It's recognizing, it's providing that feedback, and I think then it's okay. What are we going to do to address that? Being really specific. Then we talk about timelines, and we talk about specific artifacts and areas that or things that I want to see within a set period of time. And then we're gonna agree to meet on that and process, see where we're at the end of that. I'm supporting that all along the way. It's not you're your own island. It's through that constant collaboration.
Okay. Did you? Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, though, I think where Michael might be going is, so you get to the end of that process.
Then what?
You've mentored somebody. I mean, as a superintendent, you're going to have to be comfortable with, and then I make a decision that
Yep.
principal goes. You might have negative feedback from the community. It may be a big deal because some people love the principal, some people don't. And in this role, it's magnified dramatically compared to building. And I think, is that
Yeah,
kinda where you're going, right?
that's a sort of, yeah.
So how do I navigate that, manage?
I mean, I'm assuming, have you gone through that process before with other staff? I mean, when you just get to the point where the mentoring's not working.
Yes.
And I need to take action to deal with that person, which means they probably don't work here anymore.
Yep.
I mean, is that something you're comfortable doing and have done before, I think is.
Comfortable. That's. I mean, it's. I've
Yeah,
done
I'm not
it.
saying you like it, but.
No, I know, right? I relish. No, but I understand your point. Yes, I've gone through the process. I understand the process of what that takes. I think at the end of the day, if I lead in an ethical way, knowing I've dotted my I's and crossed my T's and done everything I can do to support an individual, there does come that time to say, you know what, and in the spirit of recognize we all have our gifts and our purpose in life. You know, maybe this isn't it, and we need to move on to a different location or field. I mean, that would be my approach to that. And I understand that comes with scrutiny, but the reality is there's only so much that people know, and as long as I'm leading morally, that's what allows me to do this job.
All right. So I got a couple other questions. What are some budgetary priorities that you would have as the superintendent, and how would you try to get those accomplished? And a follow-up to that would be, knowing that, beyond Wolf Swamp, there's not, you don't have central office budgetary experience. What, how would you go about, implementing those changes for any variety of situations, knowing that at some point it may be impacting the middle school, the high school, or the elementary schools? If that was clear. Was that clear?
I'm not totally.
Okay.
Oh.
So there was many parts. All right. So we can start with the first part.
No, I think I understand.
Me too.
But I'm often wrong. Can I just start with
Yeah.
my philosophy on?
Yeah,
I think what we do really well here is the process of exploring our budget every year. I mean, it starts with that initial rough, so to speak, number. And then we're able to, as an admin team, explore our priorities, explore key initiatives, things that we want. I mentioned the other night the whole idea of the STEAM, that whole idea of getting more STEAM in the building, not STEAM, figuratively, but more science, engineering, technology. And so we go through that process. It's a matter of us collecting that, and as a team, recognizing where we currently are as a district. I think, in my previous place of employment, which was my experience was always I had a rather large cost center relative to what I have now, in that I was responsible for the budget for an elementary school. That included staffing, that included the programming, the curriculum, paper, heating, all of those things that come with it. But the challenge was always, because we were net school funded, it oftentimes got into reductions. So I've done a lot with looking at ways in which we can make ends meet, for lack of a better term. Now, here, it's a little different in that there's many of us coming to the table, but my point would be, again, it's about recognizing what is priority in the grand scheme of things. If you ask me what are priorities, I feel like I'm a little bit already taking what's out there. I mean, kindergarten is an interesting one now, where I think we all endorse and support the idea of free full-day kindergarten. I think when you look at the research in terms of closing the achievement gap and propelling students on a positive trajectory, the more we can do in the early years, the better off the community is going to be, the students are going to be. So I would be advocating for that, but also I recognize that in the grand scheme of things, we would have to recognize where that falls relative to the other areas the other initiatives that we may be looking at. And maybe not even initiatives, what cost is that going to come at, right? And really weighing that, if we were to move in that direction, what are we going to sacrifice? I would say, and those are tough conversations.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of first part.
Yeah, no, that was. I think that kind of answered a lot of the second part.
Did it?
But, well, it touched on it, yeah. And so I guess my final question is, obviously you come from an elementary background.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of steps would you take to familiarize yourself with the structure at the middle schools, the culture at the middle schools, and also the culture at the high school? And, especially knowing that they are, very different animals from,
Mm-hmm.
where you are right now.
I would be their shadows.
Okay.
No. No, I would. No, well, there's a certain level of seriousness to that. I think, again, it's a great point. Boy, I've been here long enough now where I feel like I know the majority of the middle schoolers, at least at Glenbrook. But
Good point.
it's about getting over there and really committing. And one of the things I've said, I feel like all along, is I want to be that superintendent who is present and kids know, and I want to be in the classes, I want to be in the classrooms, seeing all of the great things that we're doing, and then consequently, I'm informed, and to a point where I feel like I have a solid understanding of what's going on in the buildings. I think so there's really, it's a very concrete example, but getting into the schools first and foremost. And then I definitely would want to set time aside to meet with the principals at the other levels, to really, well, all levels, frankly, because if I do move up, I mean, there's certain things that I would still want to discuss at the elementary level, but it's about engaging in those conversations as well. I just know with our schedule, another example is we meet regularly, once a week. Can we look at other schedules that would maybe not require all of us to meet, but maybe it's just areas, certain areas, high school, middle, and elementary. So.
I had one more question, but I forgot what it was.
It had to have been in the first one.
Could have been the first
Just
one.
kidding.
Okay. So, does anybody else have any follow-up questions or any additional additional questions.
Well, I think if I could just follow up on one of your questions. So the priorities,
Yeah.
you know, how much of the priority list is data-driven or, you know, I mean, we're kind of in a world where everything's based on data, but if we look at, you know, what do we need to do in this district to improve or make things even better? I mean, it's a great district already, which is why I'm here. But to make certain areas even better than they are now, how do you come to that conclusion? I mean, is it the priorities? Everybody can, I mean, kindergarten's a priority. That's something we've talked about. But at the end of the day, there always has to be a reason for it. And so in looking, if you were superintendent, how do you determine that? Is it all data-driven? Is it, you know, talking to other people? I mean, how do you come up with that priority list? Obviously, we would be part of it, but, you know.
Yeah, I would share, excuse me, just a quick anecdote to that. I mean, two years ago, I feel like it was 2 years ago, we went from a 0.5 adjustment counselor to a full-time adjustment counselor. And that was very much steeped in data, recognizing that we have a certain population that scored needs improvement or warning on the MCAS that we recognized needed social emotional support. So we were able to quantify that and advocate for that, which ultimately resulted in the position being increased to a full-time position. That being said, we also recognize that with that increase, we wanted to continue to develop that idea of social emotional learning. So really we're in the beginning stages of looking at our referral rate, our office referral rates, and comparing it to, that's almost our baseline, and now we're laying the foundation to look at, you know, those objective, as objective number as we can get with the referral rates to see if our efforts are fruitful. So, and that's something that will be reflected in the school improvement plan. So that's kind of one example.
Okay, yeah. No, that's what I was asking. So.
Okay.
Good.
So, does some of us have any additional follow-ups?
I have a question, I guess. Do you think that well, let's say, did you say that you were really, thought that data was a good indicator of performance and how you're doing? Or, like, what my question alludes to is that, do you think that we're testing too much? Do you think that we're testing at the right level? Because I know that, and not even in this school district, but some schools or some administrators, if they come from like if they have their education background in data or something, then they really push the data to have the testing all the time. And I don't know if that's a great indicator of where our students are at all times. And I just wondered where you think we are at that juncture. Like, would you change anything?
I wouldn't go any more.
Yeah.
I would certainly not be advocating for any more. I think what's interesting is with the newest ed reform, you know, they specifically speak to creating more locally generated assessments. So
Right.
to me, that's where I think there's promise in that. I think MCAS, we have Ames Web, we have benchmark assessment. I want to, and they're all good tools in their own way. And I think it helps give us a nice profile of our learners. So I'm not convinced I'd want to peel any of those away, just because I do think at the end of the day it's good. Like I just think of our Ames Web data. Much of our Ames Web assessment data, you know, it allows us to monitor systematically how kids are doing. And when we talk about closing the achievement gap, You know, that in my mind is a really important tool to have. That being said, can we create our own that effectively measure student progress? You know, those curriculum-based measures, we can, and I would definitely want to explore that. But before, you know, I would want to go through that process of really exploring before we peeled away.
Yeah.
And, you know, then I think of, it needs to be data that drives instruction, right? So we have the Ames Web, which is an indicator. It kind of throws the red flag and lets us know how kids are doing. But then there's that day-to-day, the benchmark assessment systems, which, you know, utilize running records. And then there's math, where we're pre-assessing students and we're post-assessing students. We're using that data to really make sure kids are mastering concepts. So I think they're all pieces to the puzzle. And I think we haven't, I don't know, I think we're okay right now. Again, you know, who knows what MCAS 2.0 is going to bring us. So that'll be interesting in
Yeah.
itself. So,
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Fitzgerald's here.
How you doing?
So doing well. Thank you.
Raining out there.
So, John,
Just you didn't know.
welcome. We are just about finished up with Dr. Guile. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask.
No, I don't have any.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions that they would like to ask while we have him in the hot seat? All right. Well, seeing none, thank you very much for your time and your elaboration on these questions, and you know, we certainly appreciate it. And thank you again for entertaining two of our members yesterday and showing them a good time. So.
And in closing, if I may.
Yes, please.
I just, again, thank you so much for your thoughtful follow-up questions. I do appreciate that very much. I hope I've given you the information that proves my track record and that proves I would be a quality candidate and a quality superintendent. And lastly, I can't begin to tell the public just how deeply appreciative I am of their support. I do appreciate that. It's an honor to be in the district and to be in a place where we have so many passionate and amazing community members. So I'm excited about the future. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
So at this time, we'll take a quick 5-minute break and we'll come back and begin our discussion. If that works for everybody. We should start breaking more.
I know, right?
Aren't our meetings long enough? So, all right. So everybody's back. Everybody's comfortable for the moment. Great.
Jeez, what are these?
Diane made them.
Diane, you made these? I did. Oh, wow. Yeah. Pass down now?
More in my office.
I already ate an entire Santa Claus. It's not
Just in case I get.
Okay. Yes.
Liz. You got one? Okay. Perfect. All right. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to proceed with the discussion.
I so move.
I would like some, yeah.
Okay.
I'll second that.
So for the purposes of the minutes, the motion is to proceed with a discussion related to the superintendency and the appointment of the superintendent. So I have a second.
I think it was Kim.
I did.
Okay,
Yes.
great. All those in favor? Aye. Perfect. Okay. And so at this time, I think it would be prudent for us to hear from people who have done site visits as a follow-up to these interviews, and then we'll get into the back, go the back and forth. So I'll let you, should we start with Dr. Guile or start with Wilbraham Hamden or Hamden Wilbraham, whatever you want. I know Russ and Michelle, you're on both, and Kim, you were there today.
I provided just very rough draft minutes that I was able to put together from Dr. Giles. I will highlight just a few of them. We asked some questions, one regarding the lack of central office experience, and their responses to that were that he was a quick study, he sets goals and gets them done. When he's not familiar with something, he's not afraid to reach out and seek help. He will become an expert on anything. They also talked about the the structure that we have for our admin right now, that he's a big part of the process in the system that we have. They also mentioned that the central office was at Wolf Swamp when he first started, so he was, familiar, right? They mentioned he critically thinks through decisions, and in the end, he makes the decision and everyone has faith in it because they have a high level of trust in him and the process that he uses to make decisions. In terms of initiatives that he's brought, they talked again about the wind block and the RTI and the way that he handled the rollout of that. I think Liz has it down there. They provided us with a binder that was put together over the summer, that he had formed a committee. They worked all summer and created that binder. It included a flow chart based on teachers' feedback, and he also talks about, or they also talked about how he handles the students that are above grade level. I guess he developed a protocol for teachers to determine who might qualify for enrichment or pull out services in mathematics. The criteria is they need 3 points of data, observations and notes, alternative assessments, teacher recommendations, and then they have follow-up meetings, and currently they're pulling out once a week for mathematics, pulling out a certain number of kids. They also mentioned that he's humble and doesn't take credit for his ideas or his work very much. They talked about also the social, emotional, or at all actually. And so I think they said he probably wouldn't talk about these as being his own, but they really felt like they were. They also talked about the social emotional learning initiative and the responsive classroom that he's brought to Wolf Swamp. They talked about the open response writing, how he formed a strategic plan to raise the scores, and they accomplished that task. In regards to his character and his leadership skills, they said he's the most reflective person they know. There were many, I have to say, the amount of education in that room, the people that were sitting in that room had so many years of experience. I almost wanted to do the math together with everybody about how many years they had together, but they all continuously said that he was just the best administrator they'd ever worked with and around. There were 2 parents in the room. One was also an educator, and so she was looking at him through the lens of both roles. She said he was the 3rd principal that she's had at Wolf Swamp, and she's sad to see him leave, but believes he's absolutely the right person for the job because of her interactions with him. Another parent, her parents were both educators, and she highlighted his approachability, his availability, and that he's such a part of the community throughout the town. And she actually had a quote from John Quincy Adams that she brought up in regards to his leadership. If your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, and become more, you are a leader. And the room really felt like that was something specific to Neil, that he, that quote was almost, directly about him. They highlighted his elementary experience and how important they feel that, that how transferable they felt that would be. Especially in our district right now with so many new initiatives in elementary. Another thing that really stuck out with me is that they all felt that anyone in the building would do anything he asked of them. One of the people in the room was a paraprofessional, and she said, if he asked me to shovel snow off the roof, I would shovel snow off the roof. And they all echoed that statement in saying that they're just, and she meant it, and they all said, yes, I would. They are a team, and they all work together to meet the needs of the child.
I can hear that grievance coming already.
Maybe I should have said it out loud, but I really felt that was, they wanted to, I think the sentiment there was that they really want to work at their best because of Neil. Another thing, when you approach Neil with a problem or a question, you feel like you're the only thing that is important to him at that time, in that moment. His follow-through is immediate, as immediate as it can be. He always follows through. They talked a lot about his mentoring and supervising, how he approaches everything in a very supportive way. I think we heard that from him, some of his answers. They also mentioned that he's hardly ever in his office. It's a normal occurrence for him to be in the classroom. And I will say that when I took the tour with him, we went into just a couple classrooms, but one of the classrooms right away a student said, Dr. Guile, you got a haircut. And his hair looked the same as it had to me a couple days ago, so it was just, what it said to me was that he has a real presence in the classroom and that the students really know him well in order to recognize a haircut on such short hair. And then they also said that no matter what the situation, at their meetings or whatever, everybody seems to walk out of a meeting like everybody won, like everyone in there won. And so those were the notes on it, and I think, maybe you can speak to some other things. I just tried to write as much as I could and then highlight the key parts, but...
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it. One thing that struck me is there was a special education teacher there, and 20-plus years experience, and she said this is the first time in her career where the special education component of the school building, there was no divide at all, that they felt they were exactly the same as everybody else, all the classroom teachers, the special ed teachers, and she said she's really never felt that before, so I thought that was, fairly important that she brought that up. The other thing I asked about in that site visit, though, was essentially what you asked earlier, Michael, with, what do you do, or what happens when somebody in your building isn't performing well? Because it seems like everybody's getting along, you're doing well, but there's always, if that happens, what's happened over the last few years when Neil's been there? And they described a situation that occurred where he was in the building, in the person's classroom, helping them out, doing all of these things, and ultimately it just didn't work out, and they parted ways. So that was one concern I had, and the reason I asked the site visit is I wanted to make sure that in this role you're going to make some really tough decisions, and that's one of the hardest ones, is actually deciding that you can't continue together in employment. So that came up. That was the way it was addressed. I think his style, from what they were telling us, is not, he tries his best not to get to that point, to try and mentor somebody until you get to the point where, it's not an issue. The thing that struck me the most in that site visit was, I don't know I've ever seen staff, we have one here today, but the staff was so sad to see him go, but on the flip side, they really think this is the best possible thing for the district. It was, and I deal, with schools every day of the week, but I was really shocked by the way they framed things with us. It was just a different mindset, I guess, but it really did strike me that something's a little different in that building, and I think in our school system in general. and they really support our school system. I mean, everybody that was there, I really appreciate they were there that day, and I think they did a great job presenting what Neil is like over in that building.
Does anybody have any follow-up questions on the site visit for last summer, Michelle?
I wish we all could have gone.
Could have.
Well,
Most of us.
we found out Thursday we were doing it, so.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so with no questions on that, I guess I'll let you talk about today's visit to Hamden Wilbraham.
Do you guys want to talk about it, or you want me to lead? What do you want? I have,
Who's got more notes?
I have 4 pages.
There's a lot of notes I just didn't.
Let's not go with that person.
I was gonna go to the
What do you got, Michelle? I got a lot.
Well, can I talk?
Yeah. Of course.
All right, let's see. So, let's see, we asked, we had a member of the select board, we had a member of the finance committee, we had school committee, the vice chair and the chair. Sorry, I don't have my list with me. But the first round, that's who we had. We had 2 different rounds. First was that level, and then the second level was people that work for them. You have the, okay. So they've all worked with him for 10, it sounds like most of them had worked for him for 10 years. When we actually asked them about their budget crisis or declining enrollment issues. He said declining enrollment issues were not new. He said that they have to deal with it every year, and they have to work with, he does a very good job of working with both select boards, because he does have to deal with 2 different select boards, and bringing them in and discussing that with them. He says they're dealing with, let's see, sorry, we literally drove from there to here, so it's not as formal as Michelle's. They said he understands the dynamics of working with 2 towns, that he minimizes surprises, a superb job of sharing information with the public about what type of cuts the state is putting in front of them, and they talked a little bit, transportation cuts have been huge. I wanted Marty to elaborate a little bit more on that, but I forgot to ask him. Yeah, but I think we can talk about that later. We asked, let's see, one of the guys mentioned his daughter, who's now graduated. He had asked her what she felt of him in the district, and his daughter felt that he always made sure he knew who the students were. She said he was such a nice guy. One of the ladies, she said he's approachable. He's a skilled presenter. He's thorough, knowledgeable. Let's see. He has a thorough knowledge of any of the concerns. He's very transparent. He has forums. He has online ways of talking with people. She talked about cable. Let's see. I heard built-in good. He has a built-in good team. Extraordinary leadership, good relationships with collective bargaining unit, works well with the unions, believes he is dedicated to the student. I think we heard that quite a bit throughout this, is that he was, he knew the students in the school. He attends all the functions, he goes to the sporting events, everything going on, and tries to be present and out there. Let's see. We asked what a weakness was. When they said saying no doesn't come natural to him. If he had a weakness, it would be that he does tend to take on more than he should at times. Let's see. The next group that we talked with was the acting director of curriculum and instruction. We had a principal from the Soul Road Elementary School. We had a principal at Thornton Middle School. We had a director of safety schools and health students, a tech education teacher, special education teacher / football coach, and a first grade teacher at one of the elementary schools. The first grade teacher in this group, she was she says he's always approachable. He truly listens. He's supportive. He listens about her needs. And she gave a very specific example. She said, I don't know if it's K through 2 or 1, 2.
I think they're K through Marie.
K1. So she's got a first grade class, and I guess she has some kids with special needs in her class, and she couldn't get through. She really needed a parateacher. She needed parateacher professionals. And she talked with Mr. O'Shea. She talked with, was it Steve, the acting director of curriculum? And Steve was like, just hire the para. And Marty was like, well, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the big picture. Let's take a look at how this is going to affect first grade, second grade, third grade, and up. He gave her the para. He said he listened to her, and he accommodated her need. He figured out a way to make it work. And whatever was going on in the district, he still figured out a way to make it work, because after talking with her and evaluating what was going on, she said he was in the classroom evaluating what was going on, and she said that
Yep.
So I thought that was interesting. Let's see, Steve, he says, not just, he's also a good manager. He knows his teachers, he knows his coaches, he knows his students. He surrounds himself with great people. He's just a great human being, is what Steve. Pete feels like he's always present. He cares. 2 new programs. I can't remember why I wrote that down. What was Pete, the principal over at Thornton? They had 2 new programs that they had brought in there for special education, and I can't remember what they were. Gary was amazed at how well he knew the students, the staff at each school, and he again reiterated how he has a very good relationship with the union. He appreciates the strengths of those that work with him, and he welcomes and supports them. His line of thinking, he has an ability to connect how one decision will affect the entire district. And I think that's what Meg was trying to say up above when the first grade teacher was talking about how he didn't just hire the para, he took a step back and took a look at how it would affect the entire district by putting whatever money that needed for the para. A few of them spoke to that fact. He's a big picture thinker, also knows every detail, and he's self-sufficient. He will ask when someone comes in to him with a problem or a question. They appreciate his ability to focus on them and their issue and their idea, and he'll ask them point blank, what do they think they should do? What do they think it would take to get done, and where we need to be with this? He involves them in the process. Let's see, I guess they did some sort of analysis of themselves. I don't know. A personality test last year. Okay. So one of the guys shared with us that his was, and we had asked what weaknesses were, and he's like, I don't know that this is a weakness. This could be a good thing, but this is what his analysis came up with: is that he's slow to make a decision because he's so involved with the entire process. I know that. Let's see. Another one of the, he said, I don't know a teacher that doesn't trust Marty. He's good at making him, one of the principals said that when he comes to him with a problem, Marty is good at making him stop and pause and not rush into a jerk decision. And he mentioned again how he's constantly dealing with 2 towns, 2 select boards. It's essentially 2 budgets. He was unable to do, when he first walked in, and maybe you can talk to this a little bit more, Russ, because you might understand this process more. But when he first came into the district, he was unable to do negotiations for the first 4 years because of what had already been negotiated. And then I guess the bottom dropped out of the budget, and a lot of things happened, and he really had minimal control over that, it sounds like. Is that
Yeah, it sounded to me like they settled the contract, and then the bottom fell out, and everybody asked for concessions. And so it sounds like they extended their contract for 2 years with concessions. So by the time, so he's basically gone through one round of contract negotiations after that was all done.
Right.
Because he was locked in for 4 years, and he's been there for 6. So basically, they told us that he had a little bit of a learning curve just starting the process, and by the end of the process, he was fully competent with negotiations. And they really like him there. The union
Yeah.
seems to get along with him well.
Everyone kept saying how much they love him and how well he has to work for, how good he is. He's always visible. He's at concerts, games. The kids refer to him as Marty. One of the guys mentioned about how he was walking in with his 6-year-old, and the guy and his son looked at him and said, "Hi, Marty." And he looked at his son. I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to correct you, but it seemed fine. He said he's a symbol of strength within the community. When the tornado came, they've had the snowstorm, they've had elementary reorganization, and they said that he seemed to be a symbol of strength through all of those major issues over the last few years. I think that's all I have. So I know there was no.
I'm just joking.
Very thorough.
So Michelle?
I'll just add to that. I know I took a separate walkthrough than you both did, but on mine, the gym doors were opening, or some passing period started, and the students were walking out, and right away one of them said, "Marty O'Shea," and it was it was just a knee-jerk reaction to. So what it said to me was there was a comfort level with him and the students, and I thought that spoke well to his character.
Russ?
One thing that struck me is in both site visits, one of the first things they told us is they're trustworthy, they're honest, they're transparent. They're all the things that you would hope for in that regard. And they were very clear in Hampden-Wilbraham that there's really no surprises. They're always, he keeps them updated where they are, if there's budget issues, what it looks like. And then over time, as he said today, if it improves, it improves. But the whole time they knew there might be an issue. So that is important. I mean, it's, and I think that's something, out of all the things I gained from that site visit, I think they were very clear that he's just a great communicator and very transparent. And everybody, believes he's honest and trustworthy. And they said the same thing about Neil. And so both of them, I mean, that's a really good starting place for either one of them.
For either candidate, yeah.
We can, they're transparent and they're open and honest, and everybody, believes that. And that's great to have two candidates in that category. So.
Absolutely. Do you have any other impressions or takeaways that you want to share, or Michelle, anything else you want to share?
I think the overall, that district is just facing a number of external pressures that makes it, if you have declining enrollment, I mean, we have static enrollment, that's bad, actually. That's not good to have just static enrollment, but to have declining enrollment is really a problem. It creates lots of budget problems, and they have regional transportation, they have more state aid than we have. So for us, we got our own issues. They're all kind of town-centered, where Wilbraham has a lot of different issues that we don't face because we don't get a lot of state money, virtually none. So it's, I think a lot of it is just when you're in an environment like that, you're cutting, you're looking at programs, you're figuring out how to deal with it. And so it's great if you can get out of that cycle, but I think a lot of the site visit involved kind of explaining those things, which was good because that's what we needed to hear is, what's going on and how are you going about fixing it. And we're going to face the same things. I mean, I said that to them. In a couple of years, as the board will probably tell you, we're right there with them. We're just a couple of years behind. But whoever gets the job is going to have to deal with that here, too. So.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So with nothing else to add, I guess at this point we should kind of begin discussing the pros and the cons of each candidate. What I'd like to say prior to us doing that is, I think, and Russell, you just said this, we have, we were really given two very good candidates. And we should talk about them based on the merits based on what our real concerns are. I know that we've gotten a lot of correspondence about both of the candidates, and, at the end of the day, and I think you might have written this on Facebook, these are members of our community. They live in the next town over, they have children, and so regardless of the outcome today, we, should be cognizant of that fact and remember that we have to work with them after this, and that we have to live with them after this. So with that in mind, let's do this. So, John.
I'll kick it off then
please.
if you want.
I saw you raise your hand, so I figured I'd
Well, I
give it to you.
did. First of all, I know both of these professionals, and I have the highest regard for both of them. One has more experience than another, but they bring talent to this challenge of being superintendent of one of the most challenging school systems in the Commonwealth. You should know also, I encouraged both of them to run, not knowing that they were going to come down to a head-on head. But I was thinking of people I knew out there who I'd like to see in the competition. And we were worried for a while whether we were going to get enough people from Massachusetts. And so I called them both and encouraged them to do so. Didn't make any promises, but I said, you've got a record and you've got a lot of support in the community. Why don't you do it? So I encouraged both. I was on the committee to hire Neil. And I think there were, no one else on the current committee was on that one. But he was quite impressive when he came on and saved that committee, that search. This was back in 2010. So I offer that up. I don't have any animus against either one of them. I worked with Marty as a colleague. He was also vice principal when I was there. And that was it. Okay. So my decision is going to be based on his, the record. When you have a chance to have a professional who's got a lot of experience under the belt, all other things being equal, I think you should go with the professional with the experience. So I'm going to be voting for Marty O'Shea. Thank you.
Okay. Michelle?
Okay, so I would like to say that I think we're in an incredibly fortunate situation right now. I feel that both candidates have so many strengths that they bring to the table, and I feel comfortable with both of them. I think their strengths are different, and when I was trying to go through, there was like a scale, and here are one candidate's strength, here's Dr. Giles' strengths, and here's Mr. O'Shea's strengths, and it sort of hit a point where finally my gut was going in one direction, and I started to follow it. And the things that separated Dr. Guile from Mr. O'Shea for me were first and foremost, the character and the personality of Dr. Guile, and of course I know him more than I know Mr. O'Shea, but when I've asked anybody about him, their first reaction in their face just lights up about his personality and about his character and about the style of leadership that he has, how inclusive he is, and how relationship-based his leadership is. Yesterday was just so moving, being in the room with the people that have worked with and for Neil, and I just think it was unique in the way that they referred to him and performed for him. It didn't seem like there were any management issues at Wolf Swamp, and I think that has to do in many respects to the way that he leads and the climate that he creates for the people that are around him. I also think that he brings to the table a unique experience with special ed and with elementary ed, and those are two areas that we've been talking about at this table a lot lately. The initiatives that we're really focusing on right now are related to elementary, so I felt like that set him apart in terms of his specialties. He has just direct contact with those two areas and recent direct contact. I think that the weakness that I had seen in Dr. Guile, I loved his reaction just now when Liz asked him if he would be open to mentoring, and it was like, of course. And I think one of the best characteristics of a successful person is being willing to admit that you don't know everything, and to being eager to learn it, and being open to admitting that you need help. So that really struck me when he said that, and it was almost like, of course I would. So I think on top of that, I think the amount of community support that we've seen for him, through the parents at Wolf Swamp and the people that have worked with him, and then the petition that we've seen, the number of people in our community that are supporting him, I think that speaks very loudly to me. He also has immersed himself in our community in a variety of ways. I heard people say that, how much of a presence he has in our community already. So I will be supporting Neil for the superintendent position.
Okay. Who's next? Russ?
So I don't think I'm going to say who I'm supporting yet.
That's okay.
I want to see.
And before you start, I just forgot to mention this. This is not related to what we're talking about at all, but LCTV has to go down and film the concert at 5:30. And before I forget, at 5:30, it's going to go to a wide angle for everybody at home, and there's not going to be any close-up, so nothing's happening. They're going to leave it on autopilot, and we'll get them when we're finished. But I just wanted to put that warning out there in case before we get too into this.
Yeah.
So nothing's wrong. There's no one there.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, I think it makes sense to just, if you have a candidate you really want, then explain it, and that makes perfect sense. I'm just, this process, anybody that says they never change their mind, I just think you're not thinking hard enough. Because if you never change your mind, it means you're not considering other people's point of view. So in this case, it's this decision, I'll change my mind, but you need to convince me. In this case, I probably changed my mind more than I ever had. So I really think we have two candidates that bring totally different things to the table. It's just, they're so different. Marty has high school experience, Mr. O'Shea, but he doesn't have middle school and elementary experience, and Neil has a reverse. Marty's got experience in central office, Neil doesn't. Marty's in a region, we're not a region. So, there's a whole bunch of different ways to look at it, and I think Marty O'Shea he's got a great reputation, in the area. Other superintendents respect him. I called the references. The referencers are good for Marty. They're good for Neil, as you would expect. I think there's, to be blunt, the issue I've had all along with Neil is simply lack of central office experience. Now, is that something you can overcome? Yes. After the interviews, to be blunt, I thought, Dr. Guile was very nervous. I was, if I had to vote right after that interview, I think, based on an interview alone, which I think would have been not a wise thing to do, but I probably would have voted for Marty at that moment. So, but that said, after I went to the site visit, I've never seen anything like that. The staff there is just so supportive of him, and I think he's supportive of them. And so the question is something like that, can that happen for our whole district? Could we have a district that moves in that direction? And the district's already very, don't get me wrong, it's very good. I like the atmosphere. I like the way our school functions. But I've never seen staff that have been around so long and tell you, I've seen 4 superintendents. I've seen, I've had X number of principals. This is the one, that I'd want to work for, and I would do anything for. And it wasn't just a couple of them. It was everybody in that room, custodians, paras. So that was kind of eye-opening, and that really started shift my thinking. So at the end of the day, I think they're both really good candidates. And I think it's a tough decision. I want to see kind of where, what everybody thinks, and maybe you're going to tell me something that would make me change my mind. I am definitely leaning towards one over the other, but I want to hear what you have to say. I mean, I think it's important to hear what you say, and I may be kind of on the fence, I guess, but I guess I'd like to hear what the rest of you on the committee have to give me for input in all of us.
Absolutely. Who wants to go next?
I'm not going to be as long as that.
Okay.
But I can tell you, I completely agree. I feel like I have changed my mind on this every other hour for the last 3 days as I've been just reading through information and thinking about it, rewatching interviews. Coming out of the site visit this afternoon, and then driving here, there's so many different things. I mean, I made some phone calls, and I'm not going to tell people who I've talked to because I told them I would, But when in this district, and it's not just at Wolf Swamp, I will tell you that they think Neil is honest. He's hardworking. He is passionate. He's genuine. He's a fast learner, not afraid to ask questions. He's open to learn and has tremendous potential. And those are some words that I've heard from people in our district, not in Wolf Swamp. I unfortunately don't know a whole lot of people outside of our district, but Marty has a tremendous amount of experience. We are getting ready to deal with a lot in our town and in our district. We have, and the select board has reminded us for the last year, the budget issues that we're going to be facing. So we could be faced with some very serious cuts in the next few years as well. And so I just keep thinking, because right now what I'm looking for is someone, and I think both of these candidates possess it, someone that is going to appreciate everything that Longmeadow has here in this town. We are we are, in my opinion, the best district to be in this area. I mean, why wouldn't you want to come to this school? And I have to make the best decision that what I feel is going to be best for the district, and it's going to be hard. I'm still open to hear people's thoughts. I am, again, leaning in one direction, but I have talked to a lot of people to get their thoughts on candidates, and so I'd like to hear more.
Yeah. Well, the important things are never the easy things to deal with. So, I think we're fortunate to be in a position where we have a very important choice and two great candidates. Liz?
Okay. I echo everybody's sentiments. Not easy, because both men are such great leaders, and we've heard all the public input about that. I mean, there's no question that Neil is a wonderful, wonderful person, and I experienced it firsthand when I was substituting. And from also all the things that you said about Marty that you heard from people in the district, it sounds like, again, no question, he is wonderful. So then how do you compare two people that have those similar traits, and then you compare them when they have two things that are different? So again, Neil does not have the central office experience. I don't know anybody or talked to anybody who's gone from an elementary school principal into a superintendency like that. And so I don't know what the learning curve is, but I'm guessing that he would have to really, it would take maybe a couple years for him to get used to and comfortable with being a superintendent with himself. Where on the other hand, Marty does have that experience. I like about him that he's weathered the big budget issues. I like that he has grant writing experience. I like that he has experience working with 2 different school boards and may also be difficult school boards to work with. So that even means that he can work with difficult people also with the select board. Not that you're difficult, but do you know what I mean?
Not that you're not difficult.
It's contentious sometimes. I like that he gave up that kindergarten grant because I do know that, there was a question when we were talking about kindergarten that, if we took that grant, then it would help pay for it. But there's also consequences of that grant. Do we want our kids tested up the wazoo? Do we want the teachers stressed out having to do these assessments? You really have to weigh the benefits. That's what I meant to say. What else did I say? And the other thing is that I liked about him that he, because he's in a regional school district, he has to deal with the legislators more on a regular basis. So he has to fight for his district to get money. They also have to. A lot of stuff that comes out of their budgets that we don't, so he has to fight even harder for those things. Like they have to pay for their benefits, and I think that's something. And for Neil, I mean, I do not disagree whatsoever that he is not a wonderful person and a wonderful educator, and this is a tough decision.
So that leaves me. I think that everything that every single person has said at this table is true. And ever since these candidates' names have become public, I think that the one thing I've continued to say to people who ask me what I think, and it's a lot of people, is that we're fortunate to be in this position where we have a difficult decision over, who's the best leader for our district. And I think that that's a very envious position to be in for a lot of districts and a lot of committees. And not just school committees, but select boards choosing town managers. I mean, we've got 2 people who bring some similar, but also very different skills to the table. On the one hand, Marty, I think, he's got building experience, and as we look to the future of what our middle schools look like, being able to manage that process in addition to your day-to-day is really important. And if anybody's been to Minnetonka, they know it's a fantastic building, and it turned out beautifully. Again, budget experience, and I think Liz highlighted that they do have constraints that we don't face. They've got their benefits in their lines. They've got, we have utilities, but last year even, his regional school transportation, we talked about this earlier, his regional school transportation got cut mid-year by the governor. And, that was restored, but it was very dicey there for quite a while. That was about $700,000. He's negotiated contracts, and, I know that they talked about a long-term contract being negotiated prior to him coming in. And do you know what the COLA on that was? I think it was it was 3 or 5, right? 3?
Yeah, I don't think it was enough.
3%, and that was the same year that we had negotiated zeros. So, that's a very different circumstance. He's talked about his strong, we've heard from people that he's a strong communicator. Again, central office experience is I think especially in this district, it's critical in a lot of ways. And, being able to advocate and approach legislators is also important. And he's got 2 or 3. He's got 3 legislators he has to talk to. So that's important. I think at the exact same time, Neil presents a very interesting fit for this role. And obviously, I think would do a great job in this role in a lot of ways. We know that he's a strong communicator. We know that he's loved by his staff and by his students, and that's a really great thing for him, personally and professionally, I think. The fact that he already has his PhD is interesting in a lot of ways, but as we know, Marty's going to have his shortly. And what we've seen, I think, I've worked with him as long as he's been a principal in this district, I came on right as Kim Stillwell was about to leave. And so I've seen Neil grow professionally, and I've seen the culture in that building become a really great in a lot of ways, especially because it's a school that, really is a difficult and challenging environment in a lot of ways for us. But also, it's also a really great school in a lot of ways, too. And so I think at the end of the day, we've got two candidates who present really great things for us. And, similar to what Russ said, they also have very similar deficits, although inversed a little bit. And so it's I'm certainly leaning one way on this, and I have, I think, for a little while. It is, but I will say that I'm encouraged to hear the positive things come out of both of these districts, and I think that these site visits were helpful for us, especially especially the Hamden-Wilbraham one, because, realistically, none of us have much experience there. So to hear and see what's going on over there is really important. Yeah.
So, to get to something Liz said, because I think it's a good point, I kind of racked my brain as far as who do I know that was a principal and went directly to superintendent. And the odd thing, when I finished that, it's Marty O'Shea.
Not from
So,
elementary school.
He was, that's true, but he was a principal for only 4 years at the high school. So Neil's been a principal for 9 years at the elementary level. And one thing that happened at the site visit is they indicated that if you look at the different levels, if you know elementary, then middle school and high school all builds upon elementary, and then it's a good foundation, and there's nothing wrong with going from that level to the top of the organization. And I think that's a good point. I think it's the concern I've had all along is, can a principal go directly to superintendent to be successful? And I think the answer would be, and I think Neil did a much better job today in front of us. I don't think he was as nervous. And he explained that basically he's going to rely on you to help him with a budget and to help with curriculum and to help with all the things that he would need. But I think he would have to do that in the first couple of years to make things work, because he couldn't just come in and do it on your own, because they're different jobs. Obviously, Marty was able to do it, Mr. O'Shea. Is that an easy transition? No, it's not. They really are different jobs, and that's why I've wavered on what to do here. But I will say, I think if somebody can do it, it would be Dr. Guile. Based on everything I've heard up to this point, I think he's got some qualities that you don't see in one person typically. He's just got ways of getting people to go along with him to get the job done, and based on data, which is what we kept hearing at the site visit. It was, you take the data, you make certain steps, and you follow through so that you make positive change. So I really, I think because I have confidence in central office, I think that he could make this work, and he might be, he's one of those people that's just a real rising star, and I know that term's always thrown around, but he really is somebody that I think could do a great job. And he has been a principal for a long time. It's not like, Marty had a meteoric rise. When you look at his resume, he was only, an assistant principal for 4 years, a principal for 4 years, and then he was superintendent. That's kind of unheard of. And then he became a superintendent, did well. So it's not impossible, but you need to really rely on the people around you. And I think Neil would do that because that's just the type of person he is. I think he would rely on people around him. So.
I thought of one other thing in terms of when my scales tipped, and I can't believe I forgot it before, but it really, he's a part of our system already, and I think there's really something to be said about promoting from within when you see talent, and I think it sends a tremendous message to our staff to say that we value people that work for us, and if we see that you're a rising star or you have certain qualities, if all squares, if everything is equal and things balance out, then I think it means a lot to go with somebody that already works for us.
Kim?
So through this process, I keep thinking about what is going on in our district, I'm looking for someone that's going to stay with us for the next 10 years. And I feel like, I hope that both of these candidates would do that. And it's not a stepping stone for one, but I feel like, so I'm looking for someone that's going to be here for 10 years. And over the next 10 years, we are going to face some extremely difficult challenges, more difficult than, honestly more difficult than what we went through in kindergarten and redistricting. I feel like the next 5 to 6 years are going to be a challenge with our budget, and I just feel I just keep going back to I'm because either honestly if the committee votes differently than me, I am 100% supportive of that idea as well. So however way I end up voting, I'm going to be
Right.
however way the committee ends up voting, I will be happy. But for me, what I keep thinking about is the next 5 to 10 years and what we're going to be faced with as a district, and if I feel like who is the best candidate for that. And I keep thinking about someone that has had the experience to go through it versus someone who hasn't been through it yet. And those are just the two things that I keep thinking about, because if we weren't facing the things that we're facing with the tax,
The levy limit.
the levy limit, and the idea of something having to be done with our middle schools, I would know how I'm voting.
Right.
But that's my challenge. That's my challenge. I want someone that is. I feel like I need someone that has got that experience that can take that head on.
Anybody down here? Okay. So,
Well, I guess, so if the way I guess I look at that, and I've been struggling with the same thing.
Well, no.
I think that Mr. O'Shea would be able to come in. I mean, obviously, we have a different budget process than a regional school district, but he'd be able to learn that very quickly if he doesn't already know. I think that what would have to happen is Mr. Mazza is going to be, running the budget. He's going to have to work with Neil in all of us to figure out what our priorities are. But I don't think the budget is something you have to understand how to do it, how to create it. But the superintendent is really, he's the one, or she, prioritizing with us. It's not so much the creation, because the creation of the budget is going to be Mr. Mazza. So that has been, and that's why I asked him some questions about the budget, because I'm that's something I really want to watch carefully. But we have Mr. Mazza that's going to run the budget, and I think he would have to work with Neil, especially the first couple of years, to make it work. But I'm fully confident in that happening. I mean, I think it would. So I don't. What the superintendent really needs to do is make sure that we're figuring out what we need in our district and making it work in the budget. But the technical aspects and, how to make sure that we're not, in a deficit and all of that, I mean, that really falls on Mr. Mazza to make sure that happens. So I've thought about that a lot, and that's kind of the conclusion I came to, is I think that aspect would be okay. You still have the other aspects of, just central office is different. It's a whole different animal. But I guess I'm kind of, based on everything that's been said, I just think that I believe that Dr. Guile can do it. I think he could.
I think one of the other considerations, sort of in line with the budget is, and I don't, unless you do this, I don't know if, as we do, I don't know if people tend to have an appreciation for what it takes to get out there and sell it. And, I think that's sort of, especially having a former finance committee member in the room and having a former audit committee member and a selectman in the room, understanding how to do that, I think is important. And I think what Liz said and what Kim said is we without being dogmatic about it, I think we are going to experience some challenging fiscal times. And I think that we have a challenging environment with regard to our middle schools, quite honestly, with the physical plant of those buildings. And, being able to meet people where they are, but more importantly, being able to get in front of boards who maybe don't share the same, the same mission that we do. I mean, ultimately, the collective mission is that we deliver a balanced budget and everybody's relatively happy. But, how we get there, I think, is important. And there is, for lack of a better term, a lot of horse trading that kind of takes place. And there is a lot of give and take. And we have to make some we have to make difficult decisions. And we sometimes have to make political decisions about, what can we actually get accomplished versus what do we want to get accomplished. And being able to do that is a really important thing. And I think we struggle with that sometimes, but I also think we've been successful in other ways with that. And so I think that's a value and sort of a piece of experience that I find valuable, for sure.
Yep, it definitely is.
The other piece of it is, and I think I lost my train of thought, but I lost my train of thought, so. But I got the first part done.
Well, at the site visit, they were very clear. I mean, Mr. O'Shea is a great communicator.
Yeah.
I mean, he's good at.
I remembered it now. And I think and I've remembered it now. And I think that's an important thing, for both of these candidates, and they both have their strong suits when it comes to communication. I mean, as we can see from the room, we have a very enthusiastic community that is not afraid to share their opinion about things, and I think that's great and that's helpful. But that also means learning to and having a sense of, being able to say, well, we really can't do that necessarily sometimes. And being able to have sort of a difficult conversation or take an adverse position or an unpopular position, I think is an important thing. So, making those difficult judgment calls about things like budgets and teachers and staffing levels and buildings and, even janitorial staff or custodial staff, it's a hard thing to balance. And I have no doubt that either one of them would be able to handle it. It's, I think that we've just been able to see it a little bit better detailed because one of our candidates is already doing it, at a central office level, and one of them would have to learn to do it. So I think the question for us really is, what do we want? Do we want someone who, we're investing in a lot of, in potential upside? Or do we want someone who can kind of just walk in and say, all right, tell me what's going on here and kind of hit the ground running? Both of those things, I think, are desirable. I think upside is a really good thing in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So we have to figure out what's a more important value right now. Whoever.
I'll just speak to the middle school project because I thought about this too. And I mean, Marty certainly has a ton of experience with what we're going to be facing in two different with the high school, and then he's in the middle or has experience working with the middle school project. But I think one of the most important things for us to make something happen with our middle schools is to have the support of the town. And I think we've seen how many people in the community have a lot of trust in Dr. Guile, and I think that with that connection and those relationships that he's already built and that confidence that he's already built in our community, I think that might make things easier because he has that advantage. And he knows our system and our needs already. He's familiar with our schools and what we've been talking about firsthand. So I think what he lacks in experience in regards to the actual building, he has in relationships, and he doesn't have to come in here and get people to trust him and to love him and to respect him and want to do things for him. He's already got that. And that stuff, that's a different type of skill to learn or to have, and I don't doubt that Marty would be able to do it in any way. It was very obvious to me how beloved he is in his district, but we have somebody, I don't know how many signatures are on this, but that this many people put their names on it and said, we stand behind this person and we have trust in him. So I think, in terms of if he said, shovel the roof and I'll give you a new middle school. I mean, that was, a point that was made in the sense that, if our community trusts that he says we need to do this or we need to do this, they already have that. So I think one of the things we've encountered with our middle school is just that we have to build community support for it. And I think that he's already starting at a level that would help with that.
I guess my point on the middle school thing is not so much about how we get the project, seeded and how we get the community to approve it. And I sat there with Marie through this for 3 years. It's sitting there with the contractor and getting them to do what they said they were going to do on time and on budget. And it's managing that process in addition to, developing curriculum and, dealing with staffing issues. It's holding Gilbane accountable for the fact that that this room next to LCTV is overheating and we're losing valuable equipment. And it's, it's holding them to, to their end on the warranties, and it's making sure that the windows are getting put in and, walking through a week before the school opens, and when all the tiles are peeling up, getting them to come back in and do it, or threatening not to open the building. And so being able to do that, I think is an important value in seeing that Minnechaug came out the way it is. I mean, that I have confidence in Marty's ability to do that because he's done it. I think it's a learn. I mean, Marie came in having built Concord Carlisle, so I think it's just sort of one of those things where, yes, at some point you have to learn how to do it. But because I think the task is onerous and it's hopefully shorter term, to me I think that's that's an area where Marty has a lot more sort of.
But if I could with
potential.
that, we don't have a building if we don't get the community to stand
Absolutely.
behind that building. So what, we've got, Peter Greenberg and Bobby, I'll volunteer, but if it, just kidding, Bobby. But, we can't build that building unless the community stands behind it. And like I said, we're already into that process with the amount of support that they have for them. So I think, being able to construct a building is inconsequential if you don't have what we need to get started with it. So. Not that I'm saying that Marty doesn't, but I know from the amount of support and the number of people that have spoken to me about how much they love him well before he decided to apply, I think he's got that trust in our community already.
Good point. Yes, and then Kim.
So I did want to comment on the public. So we did receive a ton of feedback from the public, both, and I want to make it clear that that feedback was not just, Dr. Guile needs to be the superintendent. We received a lot of feedback from people that would like Mr. O'Shea to be superintendent. So I think there's a lot of, and it was great that people were involved in actually watching and looking at the reminder and looking at the news and trying to figure out who's best. I mean, that's the type of community this is, so that was really great. I think that the aspect that's, and the reason I struggled is, if I just looked at Dr. Guile and said, well, he's a great guy, he's doing a great job over there and scores are improving, that alone does not mean you're going to be a good superintendent. I mean, it's an indicator that you may be. But, so I think I always try to take into account the public's input. But with a decision like this, you also have to look at, can the person really make the leap? In this case, after everything I looked at, I do believe he can. So, and I think he can because of the team we have. I think the team is strong, and I think he could work with that team. And it sounds like, based on his answers, that's what they've been doing all along with Marie, is working as a team. That said, Marty, in no way am I saying in any way that I don't support him, because he is. Everything I've heard about him, from people that work with him, I think they're facing a lot of external pressures. And so I tried to look as carefully as I could at that. And I think there's a lot of those things facing Hampden-Wilbraham right now. And I think, Kim, you're right, facing us in a couple of years. But sometimes when you look at an internal person, and if you have somebody that's really doing a stand-up job, then you take a little bit of a risk. I don't think it's a big risk, and I think if it's the committee's will that Marty O'Shea gets the job, I'm completely on board with that. So I think the guy's a great guy, and I've struggled myself figuring out who I want to vote for. So at the end of the day, I think we'll make a good decision one way or the other.
John.
I haven't really heard anything new in the last couple of minutes. I'm just wondering if we're ready to move the question.
If you'd like.
I have another question.
And, well, I'd like to move the question. And I understand that's not debatable,
It's not debatable, so it just needs
so
a
we
second.
vote on it. And then,
Well, so we second, and then you have discussion?
We would know, to move the question, well, what's the question that we're moving? Because right now, all we're doing is.
I move that we can move on to the decision
Okay.
as to who should be the superintendent of the Long Meadow Public Schools.
Okay, so the recommended motion is that we appoint candidate X. So I would ask that if we're going to make a motion to appoint someone, that we would,
Well, do you want me to phrase it that way?
it would be better.
Okay, I will.
I had my
I
hand.
move the school committee
Just
appoint
discussion.
Marty O'Shea
Move the
as
questions.
the next superintendent of schools, pending successful contract negotiation.
You didn't have a speech.
Sorry.
Hang on one second, I think we're having a procedural
Well, just
debate.
because I was trying to raise my
Right.
hand to move for Neil,
Okay,
so I had it up the whole time.
I had more questions for the board, but
okay,
just one.
okay.
So you decide what you'd
All
like.
right, so John moved the question, and technically that's not debatable.
Right.
And then
Which
he
I
made a
think
I
is-
didn't have a motion,
And then he
so I-
made-
Moving the question requires 2/3 vote, I think.
I believe that but we didn't really have a motion, so I don't know.
Yeah, so you
and
can't
then he
even
made a
move the question,
motion,
yeah. There's
and
no-
there's a motion on the table, which obviously complicates what you
Right,
want to
but
do.
before he asked to move the question, and I had my hand up to make
Right.
the motion.
And I apologize for not looking
Sorry.
down at this
It's
end.
okay.
Yeah,
I know.
it's not. I just didn't look down. So I guess the question is, we have a motion. It has not been seconded, and if
Okay,
we.
the motion to move the question was not seconded. So,
Well, there wasn't.
nothing's on the table.
Right. So nothing's on the table. So do you want to withdraw the motion you just made so that Kim
No,
can ask her
I'll leave it
question?
there and see if someone wants to second it. If not, then we'll drop it, and then we'll go on to someone who had some questions.
Okay.
I think that's the correct procedure.
Okay. All right.
I just want to hear Kim's last question.
Okay.
Thank you.
But, yeah.
Okay. All right. So
Kim?
Kim had one more question, and then
No one
we'll.
seconding?
So there's no second.
There's no second, so we'll leave the
it's Kim's
motion,
question.
and then we'll do Kim's question, and then we'll debate who's going to make the motion.
So this is our time for conversation between each other about the candidates, correct? So my question, because I keep going back, because I always do go back to scores, and I guess I want to hear how the board feels about Marty's scores that we've seen, because when I go back, because we kind of talked about it with Mr. O'Shea, but we haven't talked about it and its importance within our board. And so I wouldn't mind hearing, because specifically the special ed scores, because it is something that I did look a bit into, and when I look at, I just want to read to you the things that I read online on I got them all off the DESI website, so it's not hearsay or anything, but it just causes a question for me, and I feel like we do have people in place. We have people that can help with all of this, but I guess I'd like to hear the board's feeling on it. So when I look at the fourth grade ELL, the Hampden-Wilbraham scores have been 12%, 19%, 18%, and 30% over the last 4 years. The state average last year was 16%, Long Meadow's 37%.
Right.
And when I go down like fifth grade math, 10%, and I go down 4 years, I go 10%, 3%, 18%, and 19%. And these are the percentage totaled advanced and proficient. Okay, I didn't count, so anybody above needs improvement. The state average is 24%, and Long Meadow is at 48%. So I'm looking at those types of scores, and I'm looking at it down the line, like fifth grade ELL, 18%, 19%, 32% and 20%. Long Meadow's at 50%. And I know that we have to look at demographics within the school. Hampden-Wilbraham has the higher percentage of low income. They have the same class size that we have. Seems a very similar number of students in their school district. Their per pupil spending is about $700 less than us. I look at sixth grade, Long Meadow's at 23%, and Hampden-Wilbraham is at 6%. Granted, the year before they were 26%, they were then 11%, and then they were 28%, so there's some definite fluctuation. And seventh grade math, 19% in last year, which is above the state average, I have to say. The state average was 13% and Longmoto was at 24. So that was, you've got 8th grade math, but most of these we're at we're 33% in 8th grade math and 8th grade science. And Hampden Wilbraham is 7% and 16%. And when I look at the 7% in 8th grade math, they've 7% in 15. In 2014, it was 5%. 2013, it was 13%. In 2012, it was 18%, which is the state average this year. And we were at 33%. And so I guess I'd like to hear how the board feels about scores in general, and the fact that these scores are lower than what we'd like to see, and not what we're used to. And I know that you're not going to get, I mean, we're not getting an assistant superintendent from Wellesley to apply here. It's not happening. Like, you're not going to, it clearly didn't happen. We didn't get someone from a town that has, I mean, John, I think you pointed out at one point, you were trying to point out the demographics. Hampden, median income in Hampden is $78,000. Wilbraham, the median income is $87,000. In Longmeadow, it's $108,000.
That's correct.
Yeah, I know. So I'm trying to wrap my head around the lower scores, because the test scores are what keep our house values high. And it keeps the assessed values of our houses where they are, and it keeps the money coming into the town. And so I'm trying to get a handle on that, and I want to see how the board feels about that, where that weighs in with all of this.
Michelle?
So I think the one thing I would say to that was there a trend in the time that he was there? You know, the scores can be lower than ours, but did they rise while he was there? I'm not the data person, but what was presented to me was that the scores lowered during his time. If anybody...
Russ?
Yeah, so I looked at the data too, and I think, well, I looked at Dr. Giles and I looked at Hampden Wilbraham. And I will say there's a whole bunch of things that go into scores, and you can't say the superintendent is the one who made them go up or go down. I mean, it's not as simplistic as that, and the communities are, if you look at per capita income and then you look at scores, they kind of match as you go. The wealthiest town in the state, you have Dover, Sherborne, they're number 1 and 2. So it's really, a lot of it is that. But it is the trend, and I guess I did see that it seems the trend is going, gradually. Scores are decreasing in some areas, not all.
Not all, right?
And I think at Wolf Swamp, the trend in most areas is they've been improving. Now, I think to say that that's because of Neil or because of Marty, there's a lot of things that go into that. I mean, it's leadership is when you see a trend, you do something to fix the trend. And that's what I was trying to ask Marty in the second interview. But I'm not real clear exactly what happened to fix it. I mean, I think they did their version of RTI. And I'm sure they did other things as well, but they may have had budgetary pressures where they couldn't actually implement everything they wanted to, potentially. Although in the site visit, they seemed to indicate that wasn't the case. But that is something to look at. I mean, I mean, it's one of the things I factored in is, well, Wolf Swamp is going the right way. I mean, the outcome is going in the right direction.
You could also
I don't want to say that the outcome's going in the wrong direction in Wilbraham because of Marty.
Right.
And I'm not saying, realistically, that declining enrollment, when you have people leaving the town, the scores sometimes go down just because of that, because you have people that are leaving for a better job somewhere else or whatever. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of factors, but it's certainly worth, that's something you have to look at, because it's one of the only objective things you have to look at.
I guess my point to my thing was that I would take somebody from Springfield, if I thought that they were a good leader, and so I don't want to look at their raw scores, but I did pay attention to the trend. So.
Did you?
Okay, I want to go on record as saying I agree with Russell. I don't think you can lay responsibility for MCAS scores on Marty's shoulders exclusively, and thereby entertain the logic or the claim that it's logical that if we put in Neil Guile, they would go up. if anyone would want to make that kind of a wager. I wouldn't. The figures for Hamden are $78,722. That's median household income. And to make some meaningful judgments there, the national median household income is $53,000. Massachusetts is $67,800. Long Meadow is the highest of the three. It comes in at $108,000, almost $109,000, and Wilbraham is $87,000. So you're dealing with different quantities here, and I think I'm on record saying I think that we have two talented professionals, but we don't have Superman running for superintendent. Maybe we should, but I'm sure there would still be some dissent. So that's all I have to say on that.
The other thing I would just kind of add is that we could potentially be the people responsible for our scores improving, because we have, as a board collectively said, we're going to make targeted investments in RTI, in adding tutors, in adding resource room specialists, in, working to implement things like wind blocks. And I obviously credit all of our principals with implementing those things, and I think that that's important. But, I think what we've demonstrated as a board is that we've committed ourselves to improving, performance at all levels, and we're starting to see the results of that, which is a good thing. One of the things that I found encouraging when Marty was talking was that he's moved one of his schools to level 1. And how many level 2 schools do we have? A couple. Few.
Yeah.
And I think that's an encouraging thing, because that does not happen too often. Springfield just had White Street School move from level 2 or level 4 to level 1,
Wow.
which is incredible. And so I think that's obviously something we also have to take into account is, how did that happen? With that being said, we have seen positive increases here. We have seen gains at all of our schools, and I think that's encouraging. And quite honestly, if you look at Glenbrook, where's Nicole? Hi, Nicole. If you look at Glenbrook, they're performing very, very high now, and 100% of those Wolf Swamp School students do go to Glenbrook, whereas that's not the case with Williams. So. I think that's encouraging, but I also think that we have to evaluate that in the sense that we've made decisions collectively, and we've empowered, our principals to implement those resources we provided them with.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I think, I guess my comment about the scores, when they're going the wrong direction, there's a lot of things that can cause that. When they're going the right direction, generally that is leadership. So when we went to the site visit, that's what I heard from staff, is that a lot of it was him and his leadership. Now, of course, as he said, that takes the staff to work with him and do that, and I think they did work together to do it. So I don't know that that's necessarily the case where it's not the leadership in one direction or the other. I would never blame, I think if your scores are going the wrong way for a long time and you do nothing about it, then I will blame you as an administrator. But as long as you take steps to try and change the scores, and as I said when I was on the site visit, Hampton Wilbraham's a great school. That's not in question. They're doing a good job over there, a great job. They're the school that everybody, it's East Long Meadow, Wilbraham here. Those are all considered very good schools. So I don't want anybody to take away from this that, we're saying anything negative about them, because I don't think that's, the intent.
Kim?
So I guess, my other thought when I left today was that these were all, everyone in there kept talking about how he surrounds himself with great people. He's always approachable. He truly listens. He's very supportive. He's a big picture thinker. He's very transparent. And when I hear words like that coming from two principals, a director, special education teacher, the elementary school teacher who is also a parent in the district, it makes me feel like they feel good about where they work, which if they feel good about where they work and how they're being treated by their superintendent, that translates down to how they treat the students and what they do with their students. And I feel like there was no question to me that he was a good leader for them.
Yep.
I would agree with that. I just wish, I think there's no way to compare what we felt
Right.
yesterday in that room with what we felt today in the room. I think, I wish that you had been at
I
both,
know.
because it was very moving today, but I just felt this energy yesterday that was just, I wish I can't describe it. I can't do it justice in the notes or anything, so maybe you can be more eloquent.
It's
John?
difficult when you are in a, sorry,
Oh,
when
go
you're
ahead.
listening and then
Let me finish.
you've gotten, a letter with signatures of 300 people from your town that are saying you should go one way. It's very difficult to say, to choose a direction based on the things that we learn here in the committee
Right.
when you've got an enormous amount of support from the parents within the community. Just want to say that.
John?
I move the school committee appoint Marty O'Shea as the next superintendent of schools, pending successful contract negotiation. Do I hear a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second, so discussion on the motion.
Well, yeah, I'll lead off if you want.
Please, it's your motion.
I think we've talked this over pretty well. We've got people who have to get on with their lives, and I'm one of them. And I think we've given both candidates a more than fair hearing. I wish I could have participated more than I was physically able to, but I come to this vote believing that I know both men very well, and they're both professionals, and we're going to be well served by whichever way the outcome proceeds.
Any other discussion on the motion? Russell?
I just want to make it clear that my vote is going to be in support of a particular person, but it does not mean that in any way it's not in support of the other one. Because
Right.
I really believe that we do have two good candidates, and I'm totally comfortable working with either one. I think they're both good people, so.
I'd like to echo that, too. I feel the same way. I
Yeah.
will be supporting, one through my vote, but I support both candidates overall, and feel fortunate to have them in front of us.
I agree, this is not an easy
Yeah.
decision, but whichever decision that is voted on, I will support.
Good. It's funny because I came in today thinking that I knew who I supported, and I still do. But what I've heard from not only the candidates but from the site visits that you conducted, it certainly made me think about it a lot, and it's made me question what my sort of preconceived notions were. I agree that we have two exceptionally strong candidates for this role. And it is such a difficult decision to make. I think that when we look at what each of them brings to the table, and I think I've said this before, they both bring different experiences, but great experiences. And, in some ways I wish we could have co-superintendents, but that would be terrible. So
We're not thinking that way.
we're not thinking that way, because they do bring they both bring strong and different experiences to the table. I also agree with the sentiment that all of you have expressed that, regardless of who we appoint as superintendent, I look forward to working with either one of them and being supportive of both of them, or one of them, I should say. And it's my vote is not necessarily a disagreement with any of the people who voice their opinion about either of the candidate. It's looking at where I see the district going, and some of the skills and that I think are important in a leader of the district, and not just taking into account the petition and the emails that we've heard from parents, but also from staff members. And I've heard staff members on both sides of this issue. Probably more staff members on one side of it than the other, but I didn't go to Wolf Swamp the other day. So I think that I think that we've heard adequate adequately from people. And so if we're ready, I'll call for a vote. Liz, do you have anything to add? And then we'll call for a vote.
Yeah, same as everybody else, and also I think it's important that that everyone remembers that we also, well, most of us have children in this district, so we wouldn't pick a person that we're not concerned with about our own children, how they are going to do in school.
Okay.
I agree. Well, also, can I
Yeah, you can have one.
piggyback on that a little bit about having children in the district? I will hope that if people don't agree with our decisions, that they keep it within their homes, and hopefully so that your children can't hear. Because I can say from past experiences, it has affected, my decision has affected my children, and I'm hoping that we can keep this here at an adult level, and I don't know, that's all I'm saying.
All right, so with no further discussion, I will call for a vote. All
Should we
those.
do a roll call?
Diane?
Does it matter?
It doesn't make a difference. So.
Doesn't have to? Okay.
All right, so I'll, all those in favor of appointing Maurice Marty O'Shea as superintendent of schools signify so by saying aye.
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 All those opposed?
It's really in support of Neil, it's not opposed to Marty, I just.
Yeah, I want that.
So the vote is 4-2,
Can we have that
Mr. Chairman?
on
Yep, the
record,
vote is
Diane?
4-2.
And Marty O'Shea is our next superintendent.
Pending
That's
negotiations.
pending, that's pending negotiations, of course.
I'd like to make a second motion
Sure.
that we vote again to make that unanimous for Marty
Okay.
O'Shea.
So I'll entertain a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor of the motion?
It's unanimous. Okay.
All right. At this time, we have an executive session scheduled for the purposes of strategies that relates to non-union personnel. Do I have a motion?
Yes, motion to
I move we go into
executive
executive session.
session. I'm sorry, I'm tired.
For the purposes of strategies that relates to non-union personnel. This motion requires a roll call vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
John Fitzgerald, aye.
Michael Clark, aye.
Kim King, aye.
Michelle Grodzki, aye.
Russell Dupre, aye.
All right. Thank you very much for coming and watching. And I think at this time we'll go into the other room because these cameras are still on. I'm pretty sure Dave is down the hall. We're on autopilot, so